The bullet missed Caleb Whitlock's heart by 3 inches. Not the first time death had come calling, and certainly not the last. But sprawled in the dust of Copper Ridge, bleeding and betrayed, he made a vow that would haunt him for 8 years. Never again would he let another soul close enough to destroy him. Yet sometimes, fate doesn't ask permission. Sometimes it arrives in a dusty stagecoach with green eyes and a banker's daughter who refuses to be saved. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The high desert wind carried dust and memory in equal measure, both of which Caleb Whitlock had learned to ignore. He sat astride his stallion, Ash, at the edge of Willow Creek, a town too small to be on most maps and too stubborn to disappear from the ones that mattered. The year was 1875, and the West was still bleeding from wounds that would take generations to heal. Caleb understood wounds. He wore them like other men wore Sunday suits, stitched deep into the fabric of who he'd become. At 34, he looked older. The sun had carved lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many horizons, searching for threats that always seemed to find him first. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a gift from a knife fight in Abilene that he'd won but never forgot. His hands, calloused and scarred, rested easy on the reins. But there was nothing easy about the way he watched the world. Every stranger was a potential threat. Every shadow held a ghost. He'd been in Willow Creek for 3 days, long enough to break 2 horses for the livery stable and earn enough coin to keep moving. That was how Caleb lived now, always moving, never settling, treating permanence like a disease he'd had once and survived but had no intention of catching again. The town itself was unremarkable. A main street of packed dirt flanked by weathered buildings that leaned into the wind like tired old men. The saloon, the mercantile, the bank, the church. All the pieces of civilization arranged in their familiar pattern, as if repetition could somehow tame the wilderness pressing in from all sides. Caleb had seen 100 towns like this one, and he'd forget this one too, just as soon as he collected his pay and pointed Ash toward the next horizon. But fate, that bastard, had other plans. "Whitlock!" The shout came from outside the livery, where a man in a dusty bowler hat stood beside a stagecoach that had seen better decades. "You're Caleb Whitlock?" Caleb turned slowly, his hand instinctively moving closer to the Colt 45 on his hip, not drawing, just acknowledging its presence, the way a man might touch a good luck charm. "Depends on who's asking and why they want to know." The man approached with the careful steps of someone who'd learned not to startle armed strangers. He was maybe 50, with the soft hands of a man who worked with papers instead of rope. "Name's Brennan. I run the express office. Got a job if you're interested. Protection detail for a stagecoach run to Copper Ridge." "Not interested." Caleb turned back to Ash, checking the saddle cinch with hands that had performed the same motion 10,000 times. "It pays $50. Caleb paused. $50 was 3 months' wages for most cowboys. "For riding shotgun to Copper Ridge? That's 2 days through easy country. Why's it worth $50? Brennan glanced around as if the wind might be listening. "Because it ain't easy country anymore. Hadley's gang has hit 3 coaches in the past month. They're getting bolder, hitting closer to town. The passenger I've got needs to reach Copper Ridge, and they need to reach it alive. Find someone else." "I tried. Everyone who's got the skill to do it has the sense to say no. Everyone except maybe you." Caleb almost smiled at that. "And what makes you think I don't have sense?" "Because you're still here." Brennan pulled a rolled cigarette from his pocket, lit it with a match struck against his boot heel. "Most men who live the way you do, they're running from something, or to something. Either way, they don't stop moving. But you've been here 3 days, working for pocket change, when you could be 20 miles away by now. That tells me you're not running anymore. You're just drifting. And a drifting man might be willing to risk his neck for $50 and something to do." The assessment was accurate enough to be uncomfortable. Caleb had stopped running from his past about 2 years ago, right around the time he realized it would follow him anywhere. Now he just existed in the space between heartbeats, filling his days with work that required his hands, but not his heart. "Who's the passenger?" he asked, surprising himself. "Banker's daughter, Clara Beaumont, coming from St. Louis to visit her father. He owns the first bank of Willow Creek and half the land around it. She's traveling with a companion, supposed to be, but the woman took ill in Denver. Miss Beaumont insisted on continuing alone rather than wait. Her father's worried sick, offered to pay extra for protection. A banker's daughter. Caleb shook his head. Probably got more luggage than sense and expects to be treated like royalty. Probably, Brennan agreed, but she's also Beaumont's only child, and if something happens to her, he'll burn this town down looking for someone to blame. Better it not be us. Caleb studied the stagecoach. A Concord model, well-maintained with fresh paint that wouldn't stay fresh for long once the trail got hold of it. The horses looked strong enough. The driver, an old-timer named Silas, who Caleb recognized from around town, sat on the bench whittling a piece of wood into something that might eventually resemble a horse. When do we leave? Dawn tomorrow. That gives you time to get your gear together, maybe get a decent meal and some sleep. Caleb nodded. I'll be here. Brennan looked relieved. Thank you, Whitlock. You're doing this town a service. I'm doing it for $50, Caleb corrected. Don't confuse that with service. That night, Caleb sat in the saloon nursing a whiskey and trying to remember the last time he'd agreed to protect someone. 3 years? 4? After Sarah died, after he'd lost everything in a single night of fire and screaming, he'd made himself a promise. Never again would he be responsible for another person's life. Never again would he carry that weight. And yet here he was, breaking his own rule for $50, and the vague sense that doing nothing felt worse than doing something. You're taking the Beaumont job. The statement came from the bartender, a grizzled man named Pike, who seemed to know everyone's business before they did. News travels fast. Small town. Pike refilled Caleb's glass without being asked. You know what you're getting into? A 2-day ride through country that might have outlaws. I've done worse. I'm not talking about the outlaws. Pike leaned in, his voice dropping. I'm talking about the Beaumonts. Thomas Beaumont is a hard man. Built his fortune foreclosing on desperate people. He's got enemies, and his daughter arriving here is going to stir up old resentments. Not my problem. I'm just making sure she arrives alive. That's what the last 3 guards said. Pike straightened up, moving down the bar to serve another customer, leaving Caleb with that thought and the burn of whiskey in his throat. Dawn came cold and blue, the kind of morning that made promises it had no intention of keeping. Caleb arrived at the express office to find the stagecoach already loaded, Silas checking the harnesses, while Brennan paced nervously. She's late, Brennan said, pulling out his pocket watch for what must have been the 10th time. We should have left 20 minutes ago. Then we leave 20 minutes late. Caleb swung up onto Ash, checking his rifle, his pistol, the knife in his boot, the familiar ritual of a man who'd learned that survival was in the details. There! Brennan pointed down the street where a woman emerged from the hotel, carrying a single carpet bag. Caleb had expected feathers and frills, the kind of impractical Eastern fashion that had no place in the West. What he got instead stopped his breath for just a moment. Clara Beaumont wore a traveling dress of dark blue wool, practical and well-made but dusty from the road. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she moved with a purposeful stride that suggested she'd walked longer distances than from a hotel to a stagecoach. But it was her eyes that caught him, green as spring grass, steady and direct, taking in everything around her with an intelligence that missed nothing. She wasn't beautiful in the fragile, ornamental way that rich men's daughters usually were. She was striking, composed, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that spoke of a woman who'd learned to stand on her own. Miss Beaumont, Brennan rushed forward, taking her bag. I apologize for the early hour. You apologize for nothing, Mr. Brennan. I'm the one who's late. Her voice was clear, educated, but not affected. I hope I haven't inconvenienced anyone. Not at all, not at all. This is Caleb Whitlock. He'll be your protection on the journey. Clara turned those green eyes on Caleb, and he found himself sitting a little straighter in the saddle despite himself. Mr. Whitlock, I appreciate your service. He touched the brim of his hat, the most acknowledgement he was willing to give. Miss Beaumont, I understand the route may be dangerous. Might be, might not. Either way, you stay in the coach and follow instructions if trouble comes. Something flickered in her eyes. Amusement? Irritation? He couldn't tell. I assure you, Mr. Whitlock, I have no intention of being heroic. Good. Heroes tend to die first. If she was offended by his bluntness, she didn't show it. Instead, she simply nodded and allowed Silas to help her into the coach. Through the window, Caleb could see her settling in, arranging her skirts, pulling out a book from her bag. Not a romance novel or some frivolous thing, he noted, but something that looked like philosophy or history. Try to be pleasant, Brennan muttered to him. She's paying your wages. I'm being paid to keep her alive, not entertained. Caleb turned Ash toward the trail. Let's move. The first day passed without incident, which only made Caleb more tense. The trail wound through scrubland and low hills, following a creek that ran strong with snowmelt from mountains still visible in the distance. The landscape was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are, vast, indifferent, capable of killing you if you made a single mistake. They stopped at noon to rest the horses and allow the passenger, to stretch. Clara emerged from the coach looking remarkably fresh considering the dust and heat. She walked a short distance from the trail, and Caleb found himself watching to make sure she didn't wander too far. Not because he cared, he told himself, but because losing her on his watch would be bad for business. "Mr. Whitlock," she called, and he realized she'd caught him watching. "Could you spare a moment?" He dismounted reluctantly, walking over to where she stood gazing out at the landscape. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the way her dress showed signs of travel wear. She wasn't as young as he'd first thought, maybe late 20s, old enough to have lived, to have seen things. "Ma'am? I wanted to thank you properly, without an audience. I know this job must seem beneath someone of your obvious experience, escorting a banker's daughter through what might be empty country. $50 is $50. Yes, well," she smiled slightly. "I also wanted to assure you that despite what you might think, I'm not completely helpless. I can ride, I can shoot after a fashion, and I've traveled extensively. If circumstances require it, I won't be a burden." Caleb studied her, trying to reconcile this self-possessed woman with his assumptions about rich men's daughters. "Let's hope circumstances don't require it." "Indeed." She turned back to the view, and for a moment they stood in silence, two strangers sharing a patch of earth and nothing else. "It's beautiful, isn't it? Harsh but beautiful. I've missed this." "Missed it?" "I grew up here. Well, not here exactly, but in this country. My father moved us to St. Louis when I was 16 for proper education and society." The way she said it made clear what she thought of proper education and society. "I've been back west a few times, but never for long. Always visiting, never staying." "Why come back now?" The question was too personal, but she didn't seem to mind. "My father's getting older. He needs family clothes, and I'm all he has. So here I am, returning to a place I left and finding it both familiar and foreign." Silas called that the horses were ready, cutting off whatever Caleb might have said in response, which was probably nothing anyway. He wasn't good at conversations that veered into personal territory. Better to keep things professional, distant, safe. They made camp that evening in a grove of cottonwoods near the creek. Caleb set up a cold camp. No fire, no light, nothing to draw attention. Clara accepted this without complaint, eating the jerky and hardtack that Silas offered and wrapping herself in a blanket against the cooling evening. "You expecting trouble?" she asked Caleb as he made his rounds, checking the perimeter. "I always expect trouble. That's how you survive when it comes." "That's a grim way to live." "It's the only way to live if you want to keep living." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Who did you lose?" The question hit him like a fist. He turned, finding her watching him with those green eyes that saw too much. "What?" "Someone hurt you badly enough that you expect the world to keep hurting you. I'm asking who it was. That's none of your business." "You're right. I apologize." But she didn't look away, and somehow that was worse than if she'd pressed the question. Instead, she simply acknowledged his pain without demanding explanations, and that small act of understanding cracked something in Caleb's carefully maintained walls. He walked away before she could see it happen. The attack came at dawn. Caleb had been awake for an hour, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pink, when he heard it. The sound of horses moving too carefully, trying to be quiet. He was up and moving before conscious thought, grabbing his rifle and moving toward where Silas slept. "Company coming," he said quietly, and the old driver was awake instantly. years of frontier living making him sharp despite his age. How many? Can't tell yet. Get Miss Beaumont ready to move. If shooting starts, you get that coach rolling and don't stop for anything. Inside the coach, Clara was already awake, her eyes alert. What's happening? Could be nothing. Could be something. Either way, you stay down and you stay quiet. Caleb checked his Colt, spinning the cylinder. If I tell Silas to run, you don't argue. You don't look back. Understand? I understand. Her voice was steady, and he found himself grateful for that. Hysterics would have made everything harder. The riders emerged from the pre-dawn shadows like ghosts becoming solid. 5 of them, spread out, rifles across their saddles. They stopped about 50 yards away, close enough to be a threat, but far enough to claim they were just passing through if it came to words instead of bullets. Caleb recognized the setup immediately. These weren't random bandits, they were hunters who'd found their prey. The man in the center walked his horse forward a few steps. He was younger than Caleb expected, maybe 25, with a cruel mouth and eyes that had seen violence and liked it. Morning, friend. That's a nice coach you're guarding. Keep riding, Caleb called back, his rifle resting easy but ready. We've got no quarrel with you. See? That's where you're wrong. The young man, Hadley, Caleb assumed, based on Brennan's warnings, smiled like a man holding 4 aces. My quarrel's with what's in that coach. Or rather, who? The coach is carrying U.S. mail, federal offense to interfere. Is that right? Hadley looked at his companions, who chuckled on cue. Thing is, I don't see any federal marshals around here. Just you, an old man, and a banker's daughter who's worth more to me than any mail. Inside the coach, Caleb heard Clara's sharp intake of breath as she understood the situation. This wasn't random. They'd been waiting for her specifically. You've been misinformed, Caleb said, his mind already calculating angles, cover, escape routes. Nobody here fits that description. I don't think I have. Hadley's hand moved toward his rifle. Now, you seem like a reasonable man, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to step aside, we're going to take the young lady for a little conversation with her father about debts and properties and such, and you're going to ride away with your life. Everybody wins, except maybe the Beaumonts, but they've had their winning streak long enough. Behind him, Caleb heard the coach door open quietly. Mr. Hadley. Clara's voice rang out clear and strong, and Caleb cursed under his breath. I am Clara Beaumont, and I know exactly what this is about. My father foreclosed on your family's ranch last year. You want revenge. Smart girl. Hadley's smile widened. Not just pretty, but smart too. Makes sense old Thomas would raise a sharp one. Then be smart yourself. Clara stepped out of the coach, and Caleb wanted to shove her back inside, but didn't dare take his eyes off Hadley. Whatever you think taking me will accomplish, it won't. My father doesn't negotiate with criminals, and if you harm me, you'll have every lawman west of the Mississippi hunting you down. Maybe, but sometimes revenge is worth the price. The moment stretched like wire pulled too tight, and Caleb knew it was about to snap. He saw Hadley's eyes flicker toward one of his men. A signal. And that was all the warning he needed. Silas, go! He fired before the words finished leaving his mouth, his bullet taking Hadley's horse in the chest. The animal went down screaming, throwing its rider, and chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from both sides. Caleb dropped behind a cottonwood trunk, working his rifle lever, firing, levering, firing again. One of Hadley's men went down. Another's horse bolted. Silas had the stagecoach team moving, but they were panicked by the gunfire, running wild rather than in any controlled direction. Through the dust and smoke, Caleb saw Clara stumble as the coach lurched away from her. She'd been trying to get back inside, but now she was exposed, and one of Hadley's men was bringing his rifle to bear on her. Caleb didn't think. He couldn't afford to think. He just moved. He hit Clara at a dead run, tackling her behind a fallen log as bullets chewed the wood above their heads. She gasped, but didn't scream, and he felt her hands clutching his shirt as he shielded her with his body. Stay down! He rose just enough to fire twice more, and another of Hadley's men fell from his saddle. That left 3, and the odds were getting better, but they were still going to lose if this kept up. The coach, Clara started, is gone. Silas did what I told him. He ran. Now shut up and let me think. Ash was 20 yards away, dancing nervously but trained well enough not to bolt. If Caleb could reach him, they could run. But that meant crossing open ground while men with rifles tried to kill them, and doing it while protecting someone who'd never been in a gunfight before. Another bullet struck the log, sending splinters flying. Clara flinched but still didn't panic, and Caleb found himself grudgingly impressed. Most civilians froze or fell apart under fire. She was scared. He could feel her trembling against him, but she was functional scared, not paralyzed scared. "Listen to me," he said, his mouth close to her ear so she could hear him over the gunfire. "When I say run, you run for that black horse. Don't think, don't look back, don't stop. Just run. I'll be right behind you. They'll shoot us. They're going to shoot us anyway. At least this way we're moving." He checked his ammunition, 4 rounds left in the rifle, 6 in his Colt. Not enough for a prolonged fight. "On 3, 1, wait." She grabbed his arm. "Let me distract them first." "What? No." But she was already moving, rising up just enough to shout, "I surrender! Don't shoot! I'm coming out!" It was insane. It was also brilliant. For just a moment, Hadley's remaining men hesitated, rifles lowering slightly as they tried to see if she was serious. That moment was all Caleb needed. "Run!" He rose and fired, emptying his rifle in a pattern that forced the outlaws to seek cover. And then Clara was up and running, her skirts hiked up, legs flashing as she sprinted for Ash. Caleb was right behind her, grabbing her around the waist and throwing her up onto the saddle before vaulting up behind her. A bullet sang past his ear. Another struck Ash's flank, making the stallion rear, but Caleb held on, wheeling the horse around and kicking him into a gallop. Clara clung to the saddle horn as they thundered away, more bullets following but none finding their mark. They rode hard for 3 miles before Caleb finally slowed Ash to a walk, the stallion's sides heaving, foam flecking his mouth. Behind them, the gunfire had stopped. Either Hadley's gang had given up the chase or they were following more carefully. "Are you hit?" Caleb asked, his hands checking Clara for wounds even as his eyes scanned the terrain for threats. No, I don't think so." She was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off, reality setting in. "Are you?" He hadn't even thought about it, but now that she asked, he felt the burn along his ribs where a bullet had creased him. Not deep, not serious, but bleeding enough to be a problem later. "I'm fine." "You're not fine, you're bleeding." "I said I'm fine." He reined Ash to a stop, listening. Nothing, just wind and distance and the hammering of his own heart. "We need to find cover, rest the horse, figure out where we are." "What about the coach? What about Silas?" If he's smart, he kept running until he hit Copper Ridge. If he's not... Caleb didn't finish the thought. "Either way, we can't help him now. We need to focus on staying alive." Clara nodded, and he felt her lean back slightly against his chest, exhausted. It was a practical thing, not intimate, just a tired woman seeking support from the nearest solid object. But Caleb felt the warmth of her through their clothes, felt her breathing begin to steady, and something in that simple human contact made his carefully maintained armor feel suddenly very thin. They found a cave an hour later, more of an overhang really, but deep enough to hide Ash and provide shelter from both sun and searching eyes. Caleb helped Clara down, noting the way she winced as her legs took her weight. Not used to riding? Not bareback on a galloping horse while being shot at? No. She tried to smile, but it came out shaky. That's a fairly specific skill set. He almost smiled back. Almost. Instead, he turned to tend Ash, checking the bullet graze on the stallion's flank. Superficial, thank God. The horse had saved their lives. The least Caleb could do was make sure he'd survive to do it again. "Let me see your wound." He turned to find Clara standing behind him, her carpet bag in hand. She'd somehow managed to grab it during the chaos. "It's nothing. It's bleeding through your shirt. Let me see it." There was steel under the polite request, the kind of determination that said she'd keep arguing until she won. Caleb found himself pulling off his shirt before he'd consciously decided to comply. Clara's intake of breath was sharp when she saw the wound. A deep crease along his ribs, still oozing blood. "This needs to be cleaned and bandaged properly." "I've had worse." "I don't doubt it." She pulled supplies from her bag, clean cloth, a small bottle of whiskey, needle and thread. Prepared, he thought. Not just some pampered banker's daughter playing at adventure. This is going to hurt. Everything hurts. But when she poured the whiskey over the wound, he hissed through his teeth, his hand involuntarily gripping her wrist. Sorry. Her voice was gentle, but her hands kept working, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. Where did you learn field medicine? The war. After. When the dying didn't stop just because the shooting did. The memory came with old ghosts, field hospitals screaming, the smell of gangrene and death. You learn or you watch people die from things that shouldn't kill them. I learned from my mother, Clara said, threading the needle. She was a doctor's daughter, believed women should know practical medicine, scandalized half of St. Louis society by teaching me to stitch wounds and set bones instead of needlepoint and watercolors. The needle pierced his skin, and Caleb watched her face rather than the wound. She was concentrating, her green eyes focused, her lower lip caught between her teeth. There was something intimate about the moment, her hands on his bare skin, the quiet of the cave, the shared understanding that violence had brought them to this strange place of trust. Why did you step out of the coach? He asked suddenly. You could have stayed hidden, stayed safe. Would it have mattered? She tied off a stitch, started another. They knew I was there, and I thought, foolishly perhaps, that I could talk sense into them. You can't talk sense into men like Hadley. They're past sense, past reason. All they understand is taking what they think they're owed. Like my father took their ranch? I don't know anything about that. But you can guess. She tied off the final stitch, began wrapping the wound with clean cloth. My father isn't a cruel man, but he's a hard one. He forecloses when people can't pay, because that's business. He doesn't see the families, the histories, the land that's been worked for generations. He just sees numbers and contracts and the law. And you? I see both sides and understand neither is completely wrong or right, but that doesn't make it easier. She finished bandaging him, her fingers lingering for just a moment on his skin before she pulled away. There. Try not to get shot again. I'll do my best. He pulled his shirt back on, wincing as the fabric scraped against the wound. Thank you. You saved my life. It seems only fair I help save yours. She settled back against the cave wall, exhaustion finally winning. What do we do now? We wait until dark, then we move. Copper Ridge is maybe 20 miles northeast. If we're careful, avoid the main trail. We can make it in 2 days. 2 days? She closed her eyes. My father must be frantic. He'll know you're alive if the coach made it to town. Silas will tell him what happened. And if the coach didn't make it? Caleb didn't answer that because there wasn't a good answer. Either Silas had escaped and they were expected, or he hadn't and they were on their own in hostile country with men hunting them. Neither option was comforting. As the afternoon heat built outside their shelter, Clara drifted into an exhausted sleep, her head tilting against the stone wall. Caleb sat watch, his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the landscape beyond the cave entrance for any sign of pursuit. But part of his attention, more than he wanted to admit, kept drifting back to the woman sleeping a few feet away. She hadn't screamed during the ambush, hadn't frozen. She'd been scared but functional, brave in the way that mattered more than the absence of fear. And she'd tended his wound with gentle, competent hands, treating him like a person rather than just a hired gun. When was the last time anyone had done that? 8 years, a voice whispered in his mind. Sarah. 8 years since anyone had touched him with care instead of fear or transaction. He pushed the thought away roughly, angry at himself for allowing it. Clara Beaumont was a job, nothing more. Once he got her to Copper Ridge and collected his pay, they'd never see each other again. That was how it had to be, because the alternative, caring, connecting, allowing someone past his defenses, that path led only to pain. He'd learned that lesson in blood and ash, and he wasn't fool enough to forget it. But as he watched her sleep, her face peaceful despite everything they'd been through, Caleb couldn't quite silence the small, treacherous part of him that wondered what it might be like to take the risk again, to let someone in, to believe that not every story ended in loss. Outside, the sun continued its arc across a merciless sky, and somewhere behind them, men with guns and grievances searched for their trail. But in that moment, In the cool darkness of a cave that offered temporary sanctuary, Caleb Whitlock allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in 8 long years. Hope. It terrified him more than all of Hadley's gang combined. Darkness came slowly to the high desert, the sun reluctant to surrender its hold on the sky. Caleb watched the shadows lengthen across the scrubland beyond their shelter, counting the minutes until it would be safe to move. Beside him, Clara stirred, her eyes opening with the confused flutter of someone waking in an unfamiliar place before memory crashed back in. How long did I sleep? 3 hours, maybe 4. He handed her his canteen, noting the way her hands trembled slightly as she drank. Delayed shock, he recognized. The body's way of processing what the mind couldn't handle in the moment. We'll move soon. There's enough moonlight to travel by, and the dark will hide us better than daylight. She nodded, returning the canteen, and he saw her gathering herself, pulling back the fear, the exhaustion, the very reasonable desire to fall apart. It was something he understood intimately, that daily act of choosing to keep going when everything in you wanted to stop. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "And I need you to answer honestly." "That depends on the question. What are our real chances of reaching Copper Ridge alive?" He could have lied. Should have lied, probably, given her something comfortable to hold on to. But there was something in her eyes that demanded truth, and Caleb found he couldn't insult her with false comfort. Better than 50-50. Hadley's gang is down to 3 men, maybe 4 if there were more we didn't see. They're hurt, disorganized, but they know this country and we don't. They can guess where we're heading and set up ahead of us. "So we're being hunted." "We're being hunted," he confirmed. "But I've been hunted before and I'm still breathing. That should count for something." "It does." She stood, brushing dust from her skirts. A futile gesture given their circumstances, but he recognized it for what it was. An attempt to maintain some scrap of normalcy in a world that had gone violently sideways. "What do I need to do?" "Stay quiet, stay close, do exactly what I say when I say it. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. No arguments, no hesitation. Can you do that? Can I trust that you won't order me to save myself while you sacrifice yourself heroically?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "I've read enough dime novels to know how these stories usually end. The noble gunfighter makes a brave last stand so the innocent woman can escape. I'm asking if that's your plan, because if it is, I'd rather know now." Caleb found himself almost smiling despite everything. "I'm not a dime novel hero, Miss Beaumont. I don't do noble sacrifices. My plan is for both of us to reach Copper Ridge alive, collect my $50, and never see each other again. That clear enough?" Perfectly clear. Something flickered in her expression. Relief? Disappointment? But it was gone before he could identify it. Then let's not waste the darkness. They moved out as the last light bled from the western sky, Ash picking his way carefully across the broken terrain. Caleb kept them off the main trail, following dry creek beds and rocky ground that wouldn't hold tracks. It was slower going, harder on the horse, but speed meant nothing if it led them straight into an ambush. Clara rode in front of him, her back pressed against his chest out of necessity rather than choice. 2 people on a horse built for one left no room for modesty. He could feel her tension in the set of her shoulders, the careful way she held herself as if trying to take up as little space as possible. "Relax," he said quietly, his mouth close to her ear so his voice wouldn't carry. "You're going to exhaust yourself before we've gone 5 miles. I'm not sure how to relax while riding through the dark with killers hunting us." "Fair point, but tensing up won't help. Here." He shifted slightly, adjusting her position so she leaned back more fully against him. "Use me as a backrest. Save your energy for when you actually need it." She hesitated, then slowly allowed her weight to settle against him, and Caleb tried not to notice how right it felt. The warmth of another body, the trust implicit in that surrender. He'd spent 8 years holding himself apart from human contact, and now a banker's daughter he'd known for less than 2 days was dismantling his defenses simply by existing. They rode in silence for the better part of an hour, the only sounds the soft plod of Ash's hooves and the whisper of wind through sage. The moon rose full and bright, painting the landscape in shades of silver and shadow. Beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. May I ask you something? Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. You can ask. I might not answer. The war, were you cavalry? Infantry mostly, some scouting toward the end. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press, which he appreciated. The war was another country, another life, and he had no desire to revisit it. My father was too old to serve, but my uncle wasn't. He died at Shiloh. She was quiet for a moment. I was 12. I remember the telegram arriving, my mother collapsing, my father standing so still I thought he might shatter. Death came to our door dressed in official words on yellow paper, and nothing was ever quite the same after. No, Caleb agreed softly. It never is. Is that when you learned to expect the worst from the world? The war? The war taught me how to survive it. Life taught me to expect the worst. He felt her shift slightly, turning her head as if trying to see his face in the darkness. People you love die. Everything you build gets torn down. The only constant is loss, so you either make peace with that or you let it destroy you. That's a bleak philosophy. It's an honest one. But not complete, she said, and there was something gentle in her voice that made his chest tighten. Because if loss was truly the only constant, you wouldn't still be here. You would have given up, stopped fighting, let the darkness win. But you're still riding, still protecting, still choosing to save lives, even when you claim not to care. That has to count for something. Caleb had no answer for that, so he said nothing, and Clara mercifully let the silence stand. But her words burrowed into him like splinters, small and sharp and impossible to ignore. They stopped near midnight at a place where a spring fed a small pool surrounded by cottonwoods. While Ash drank gratefully, Caleb scouted the perimeter, checking for signs of other travelers. Nothing. They were alone in the vast emptiness of the territory, at least for now. We'll rest here for a few hours, he said, returning to where Clara sat on a fallen log, rubbing her legs. Sleep if you can. We'll move again before dawn. Will you sleep? Someone needs to keep watch. Then wake me in 2 hours and I'll take a turn. You can't stay awake forever. I've done it before. And I'm sure it nearly killed you. She stood, moving closer, and in the moonlight her eyes were dark and serious. I meant what I said earlier, Mr. Whitlock. I'm not helpless, and I won't be treated as cargo to be delivered. If we're going to survive this, we do it as partners, which means sharing the burden. So wake me in 2 hours, or I'll wake myself and be cross with you for treating me like I'm made of porcelain. He found himself wanting to smile again, something she seemed to provoke with alarming regularity. You always this stubborn? My father would say I'm twice as stubborn as this on a good day. She settled back against the log, wrapping her arms around herself against the cooling night. 2 hours, Mr. Whitlock. I mean it. Caleb, he said, surprising himself. If we're partners, you might as well use my name. Caleb, she repeated, and something about hearing his name in her voice made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. Then you should call me Clara. Miss Beaumont seems rather formal for people who've been shot at together. He nodded, then moved away to take up position where he could watch the approaches. Behind him, he heard Clara settling in, her breathing gradually evening out as exhaustion pulled her under. He should have felt relieved, one less thing to worry about while she slept. Instead, he felt the absence of her voice like a physical thing, and that realization troubled him more than Hadley's gang ever could. True to his word, he woke her 2 hours later. She came awake instantly, alert in the way of people who'd learned not to trust deep sleep. Anything? Quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but that could just be the hour. He handed her his rifle. Wake me if you see or hear anything that doesn't belong. And Clara, if trouble comes and you can't wake me fast enough, you get on that horse and you ride. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Just go. We've already had this conversation. We're having it again. I mean it. So do I. She checked the rifle with hands that knew their way around firearms, and he filed that information away with everything else he was learning about her. No heroic sacrifices, remember? We both get out, or neither of us does. That was the agreement. I don't remember agreeing to that. Then consider it a unilateral amendment to our contract. She smiled slightly, and even in the darkness he could see the steel beneath the gentleness. Now go to sleep before you fall over, Caleb. I've got watch. He wanted to argue but found he lacked the energy. The day had been long and violent, and his body was demanding rest whether his mind agreed or not. He lay down on the hard ground, his coat rolled under his head as a pillow, and closed his eyes. Sleep came fast and heavy, dragging him down into darkness where Sarah waited as she always did. Not as she'd been at the end, consumed by fire and screaming, but as she'd been before, laughing and alive and looking at him like he'd hung the moon. In the dream, she was telling him something important, her lips moving, but he couldn't hear the words. He reached for her, and she dissolved like smoke. And then the smoke became real smoke, and he was burning, trapped, everyone he loved dying while he stood helpless. Caleb, wake up! He came awake with a gasp, his hand reaching for his gun before he recognized Clara kneeling beside him, her hand on his shoulder. The sky was lightening in the east, not yet dawn, but close enough. "You were dreaming," she said softly. "Bad one, from the sound of it." He sat up, rubbing his face, trying to scrub away the images that clung like cobwebs. "How long was I out?" "4 hours. I let you sleep longer than we agreed." She held up a hand as he started to protest. "Before you get angry, nothing happened. No signs of pursuit, no trouble. You needed the rest more than we needed to move in the dark." He should have been angry, should have reminded her that his orders were meant to keep them alive. But looking at her face in the pre-dawn light, tired but resolute, concerned but not pitying, he found he couldn't muster the energy for anger. "The dream," she said, settling beside him. "Do you have it often?" "That's personal. So is watching someone fight demons in their sleep." She was quiet for a moment, then, "You don't have to tell me details. But I want you to know that I understand nightmares. I understand the way the past refuses to stay buried, and if talking helps, I'm willing to listen." "Why?" The question came out harsher than he intended. "Why do you care?" "Because you saved my life yesterday. Because you're trying to save it again today. Because despite your best efforts to convince everyone you're nothing but a hired gun with no feelings, I can see you're carrying weight that's crushing you." She met his eyes steadily. "And because someone should care, Caleb. Everyone deserves that much." Something in her words cracked the last of his defenses, and before he could stop himself, he was talking. "Her name was Sarah, my wife. We had a house outside Abilene, small place, nothing fancy, but it was ours. She was pregnant, 6 months along. We were going to name him Thomas if it was a boy, Elizabeth if it was a girl." The words came like blood from a wound, painful but necessary. "There was a fire. Started in the barn, spread to the house. I was in town buying supplies. By the time I got back—" He didn't finish. Couldn't finish. But Claire's hand found his, her fingers threading through his, and that simple contact gave him the strength to continue. "I got there in time to hear her screaming, in time to try to get inside and fail, in time to watch the roof collapse and know that everything I loved was gone." His voice was flat, emotionless, because that was the only way to say these words without breaking. "The doctor said she probably died of smoke before the flames reached her. Said it like that was supposed to be a comfort, like there's a good way to lose everything." "There isn't," Clara said quietly. "Loss is loss and grief is grief, no matter the manner of it. I'm so sorry, Caleb. It was 8 years ago. I should be over it by now." That's not how grief works. It's not something you get over like a cold or a broken bone. It's something you learn to carry, and some days it's heavier than others. She was still holding his hand, and he found he didn't want her to let go. "Is that why you don't let people close? Why you keep moving, never staying? If you don't get close, you can't lose them. Simple math." "It's not math, it's running. And eventually you run out of places to go, Caleb. Eventually you have to stop and face the fact that being alive means risking pain, and the only alternative is not being alive at all. That's easy to say when you haven't—" He stopped himself, but Clara finished the thought. "When I haven't lost someone I loved, but I have." Her voice was steady, but sad. "His name was Daniel. We were engaged. He was a lawyer, good and kind, and everything my parents wanted for me. We were 3 weeks from the wedding when he took ill, cholera. He was dead in 5 days." Caleb stared at her, seeing her fully for the first time. Not just a banker's daughter or a woman to be protected, but someone who'd walked through her own fire and survived. I'm sorry. So am I. Every day, in small ways that most people never see. But here's what I learned, Caleb. Daniel died, but I didn't. And I had a choice. Let his death be the end of my story, or let it be a chapter in a longer book. I chose the longer book. She squeezed his hand. You can choose it too. I don't know how anymore. Maybe you start small. Maybe you start by admitting that you don't actually want to die alone in some dusty town, forgotten and unmourned. Maybe you start by believing that what happened to you was terrible and unfair, but it doesn't have to be the last word on who you are. Dawn was breaking now, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and Caleb looked at this woman who'd somehow slipped past every wall he'd built and found himself wanting to believe her. Wanting to believe that there was still a future waiting somewhere beyond the horizon of his grief. We should move, he said finally, standing and pulling her up with him. But he didn't let go of her hand immediately, and she didn't pull away. And for just a moment they stood there in the new day's light, two wounded people finding unexpected comfort in shared pain. Then the moment passed, as moments do, and they prepared to ride. But something had shifted between them. Some understanding reached without words. They were no longer stranger and client, guard and protected. They were two souls who'd been broken by life and were somehow, against all odds, still standing. The morning passed without incident, the landscape gradually changing from scrubland to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine. They kept to the high ground where possible, using the elevation to watch for pursuit. Around midday, Clara spotted it first, a thin column of smoke rising from the valley below. Riders, Caleb confirmed, studying the distant figures through his spyglass. 3 of them. Could be anyone, but it's probably not, Clara finished. They're between us and Copper Ridge? If we stay on the direct route, yes, but there's another way, takes us north and west, adds a day to the journey, but keeps us off the main trails. He lowered the spyglass, weighing options. Question is whether that smoke means they've given up on catching us and are just traveling, or whether they're hoping we'll see it and think exactly that. What would you do if you were them? I'd split up. Leave one group on the main trail as bait, send another around to cut off the alternate routes. He turned Ash north. Which means we go even farther out of our way, take the long route through the high country. It'll be harder riding, colder at night, but safer. How much longer will that take? 2 days, maybe 3. Depends on the terrain and whether we run into any more trouble. He felt her stiffen against him. I know it's not what you want to hear. What I want doesn't matter. What matters is surviving. She was quiet for a moment, then, my father will be sick with worry. If he's heard from Silas, he knows I'm alive, but not where I am. He'll be organizing search parties, offering rewards, probably driving the sheriff mad with demands. Good. Let him worry. Let him raise hell. The more noise he makes, the more pressure on Hadley to give up and disappear. Caleb guided Ash along a narrow trail that climbed toward the tree line. Tell me about him, your father. Why? Because we've got 3 days of riding ahead of us, and silence gets boring. She laughed, a surprised, genuine sound that made something warm bloom in Caleb's chest. That's the most words you've strung together about something that isn't survival or violence. Are you actually trying to make conversation? Don't read too much into it. Too late. But she settled more comfortably against him and began to talk. My father is complicated. He grew up with nothing, literally nothing. His parents died when he was 8, and he spent the next 10 years working whatever jobs he could find, sleeping in barns, going hungry more often than not. He pulled himself up through sheer will and ruthless determination. That explains the reputation. It does. He sees business as war, and in war you don't show mercy to your enemies. The problem is he sometimes forgets that not everyone who can't pay their debts is an enemy. Some of them are just people who got unlucky. She sighed. I've tried to talk to him about it, but it's like talking to stone. He believes that if he could survive and succeed, anyone can. He doesn't understand that not everyone has his particular combination of intelligence, drive, and frankly capacity for emotional detachment. But you love him anyway. I do. He's my father. And beneath the hard businessman, there's a man who read me stories every night when I was little, who taught me to ride and shoot and think for myself, who mourned my mother with a grief that nearly broke him and channeled it into making sure I'd never be helpless or dependent. Her voice softened. He made me strong, even if he did it in ways that scandalized polite society. They climbed higher as the day aged, the air growing thinner and cooler. Ash labored under their combined weight, and Caleb made them stop frequently to rest the horse. During one of these stops, Clara wandered a short distance away, not far enough to worry him, but far enough for privacy. When she returned, her face was troubled. "What is it?" "I was thinking about the Hadleys, about the fact that my father's business decisions created men angry enough to try to kill me." She sat on a rock, looking out at the vista of mountains and valleys stretching endlessly before them. "Does that make me complicit? If I benefit from his wealth, knowing how he obtained it?" "You're asking the wrong person. I'm not a philosopher. You're a person who's lived and seen things. That counts for something." She looked at him. "When you were a soldier, did you ever question the orders you were given, the causes you were fighting for?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, memories rising like ghosts. "Every day. Especially toward the end when it was clear we were losing and the dying seemed pointless. But questioning and refusing are different things. I followed orders because not following them would have gotten me and everyone I served with killed. I did what I had to do to survive, and I've spent the years since trying to figure out if that makes me a coward or a pragmatist." "Neither," Clara said firmly. "It makes you human. We're all just trying to survive in a world that's often cruel and rarely fair. The best we can do is try to be better than our worst choices and live with the fact that we'll never be as good as our best intentions." "That's a charitable view." "It's a realistic one." She stood, brushing dust from her skirts again, that habitual, futile gesture. "I can't change what my father did to the Hadleys. I can't undo their anger or give them back their land. But I can choose what kind of person I'm going to be going forward. I can choose to see people instead of just numbers, to understand that poverty isn't always a moral failing and wealth isn't always earned through virtue." "Your father know you think this way?" "He knows. We fight about it regularly." She smiled slightly. "I inherited his stubbornness, which he loves and hates in equal measure. He wanted me to marry well, settle into society, be a credit to his name. Instead, I started working at a charity hospital in St. Louis, tending to people who couldn't afford real doctors. He was furious." "Why?" "Because Beaumonts don't soil their hands with other people's problems. Because it was beneath our station. Because—" She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "Because after Daniel died, I couldn't just go back to tea parties and gossip. I needed to do something that mattered, something that helped. The hospital gave me that." Caleb found himself understanding perfectly. After Sarah, after the fire, he'd thrown himself into work. Any work, dangerous work, because stillness meant thinking and thinking meant drowning. "Your father came around eventually?" "Not entirely, but he loves me enough to let me make my own mistakes, as he calls them." She turned to face him fully. "That's why I was coming to Copper Ridge. He's offered me a position at his bank handling loans and assessments. He thinks I'll apply woman's intuition to reading borrowers. I think he's hoping proximity will cure me of my charitable impulses." "Will it?" "No, but I'll take the position anyway, because I've learned you can do more good from inside a system than outside it, even if it means compromising sometimes." She met his eyes. "Does that make me a hypocrite?" "It makes you practical. There's nothing wrong with that." They remounted and continued their journey into the high country, where pine forests thick with shadow offered cover, but also concealment for anyone tracking them. Caleb's tension ratcheted up with every mile. His senses stretched taut, listening for the snap of a twig or the whinny of a horse that would signal an ambush. But the forest remained quiet except for wind in the branches and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. As afternoon faded toward evening, they found a clearing beside a stream, sheltered on three sides by rock outcroppings that would make approach difficult. "We'll camp here," Caleb decided, helping Clara down. "Cold camp again. No fire." "I'm getting used to it," she stretched, wincing, "though I'm not sure I'll ever get used to riding double." "Better than walking." "True." She knelt by the stream, splashing water on her face, and Caleb found himself watching her with something dangerously close to affection. She'd been through hell in the past 2 days, ambushed, shot at, forced to flee through wilderness with no guarantee of survival, and she hadn't complained once, hadn't fallen apart or demanded special treatment or blamed him for the situation. Sarah had been like that too, he remembered, steady in crisis, refusing to be diminished by hardship. It was one of the things he'd loved most about her, that core of strength that no adversity could break. The memory didn't hurt quite as much as it usually did, and that realization brought its own complicated mixture of guilt and relief. "Caleb?" Clara's voice pulled him back to the present. "You were far away just then." "Sorry, thinking about your wife." He should have been surprised that she'd guessed, but somehow he wasn't. Clara saw too much, understood too much. It should have bothered him. Instead, it felt almost comfortable. Yeah, realizing that remembering her doesn't have to hurt as much as it has been. That maybe... He stopped, unsure how to finish. That maybe grief can coexist with other feelings? Clara suggested gently. That remembering the dead doesn't mean forgetting to live? Something like that. She smiled, sad and knowing and kind. "I'm glad. She wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life in the dark, Caleb. No one who truly loved you would want that." "You sound certain." "I am. Because I know if Daniel could see me now, he'd want me to be happy. To find love again, if I'm lucky. To live fully instead of just existing." She came to sit beside him on the rock where he'd settled. "The dead release us, Caleb. We're the ones who insist on staying trapped." They sat in companionable silence as darkness gathered, and Caleb felt something shifting inside him, something that had been frozen for 8 years beginning, finally, to thaw. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, this feeling of possibility, of a future that might hold more than just survival. "Tell me about Copper Ridge," he said eventually. "What are you walking into when we get there?" Clara considered the question. "A small town trying to become a bigger town, mostly. My father controls the bank, which means he controls most of the development. He's funding a new schoolhouse, a proper hotel, expanding the rail spur. He sees it as his legacy, building something that will outlast him. And you? What's your role in this legacy?" "I'm supposed to be the human face of Beaumont prosperity, the dutiful daughter who reminds people that we're not just a name on foreclosure notices." She drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "But I want to be more than that. I want to actually help people build lives instead of just profit from their struggles." "You think your father will let you?" "I think he'll fight me every step of the way, and I'll fight back. And eventually we'll reach some compromise that leaves us both unsatisfied." She glanced at him. "What about you? After you collect your $50 and we never see each other again, as per our agreement, what then?" The question caught him unprepared. He'd spent so long not thinking about the future that he'd forgotten it was something people did. "I don't know. Find another job, I guess. Move to another town. Same as always." "That doesn't sound like much of a life." "It's the only one I know anymore." "But it doesn't have to be." Clara turned to face him fully, her expression serious in the gathering darkness. "Caleb, I know we've only known each other for a handful of days, and I know you've made it very clear that this is just a job for you. But I also know what I see when I look at you, someone who's ready to stop running, even if he doesn't quite know it yet." His heart hammered against his ribs. "Clara, I'm not proposing marriage or declaring undying love," she said quickly, a flush rising in her cheeks. "I'm just saying that Copper Ridge could use someone with your skills. The sheriff is 70 if he's a day, and the town is growing faster than the law can keep up. There's work there, legitimate work, if you wanted it. I'm not a lawman. You're a man who protects people. That's close enough." She stood, perhaps sensing she'd pushed too far. "Just think about it. That's all I'm asking." She moved away to prepare her bedroll, leaving Caleb alone with thoughts that spun too fast to catch. The smart thing would be to collect his pay and move on, same as he always did. Copper Ridge would be just another town. Clara Beaumont just another person he'd saved and forgotten. Except he already knew he wouldn't forget her. Not her green eyes or her sharp mind, or the way she'd bandaged his wounds with gentle, competent hands. Not the conversations they'd shared or the grief they'd acknowledged, or the way she'd looked at him like he was worth saving, even from himself. The smart thing would be to leave. But Caleb Whitlock had spent 8 years being smart and safe and alone. and he was beginning to realize that smart and safe were just other words for half alive. Maybe it was time to take a risk on something that wasn't just survival. Maybe it was time to try living again. The thought stayed with him through the night, refusing to be dismissed or forgotten. Caleb lay on the hard ground watching stars wheel overhead, listening to Clara's steady breathing from where she slept a few feet away. And for the first time in 8 years, he allowed himself to imagine a different kind of future, a place to stay instead of just pass through. Work that meant something beyond the next meal. Maybe even, and this thought came with equal parts terror and longing, someone to come home to at the end of the day. He was still wrestling with these dangerous possibilities when Clara woke before dawn, sitting up and immediately reaching for the rifle he'd left beside her. The motion was automatic, practiced, and he found himself revising yet another assumption about bankers' daughters and their capabilities. "How did you sleep?" she asked, her voice soft in the pre-dawn stillness. "Didn't, mostly. Thinking." "About what I said?" She stood, moving to the stream to wash her face, and he noticed she didn't ask him to confirm or deny. She simply stated it as fact, reading him with the same unsettling accuracy she'd displayed since the moment they'd met. Among other things, he rose, checking Ash's condition, running his hands over the horse's legs looking for any sign of injury or strain. The stallion had carried them far and hard, and the least Caleb could do was make sure he was fit to continue. "We should reach the valley by this afternoon if we push hard. From there, it's another half day to Copper Ridge. Assuming we don't run into Hadley's men." Assuming that, he began saddling Ash, his movements economical, born of years of repetition. "But if we're going to run into them, it'll be today. They know we're heading for Copper Ridge, and they know the routes are limited through this country. If they're smart, and I think they are, they'll have set up somewhere with good sight lines and limited escape route." Clara came to stand beside him, her arms wrapped around herself against the morning chill. "So we're riding into a trap. We're riding through country where a trap might be waiting. Different thing." He glanced at her, noting the set of her jaw, the way her eyes scanned the tree line with the wariness of someone who'd learned the world could turn violent without warning. "You scared?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but also tired of running. I want this to be over, one way or another." "It will be. Before nightfall, we'll either be in Copper Ridge drinking hot coffee and sleeping in real beds, or—" He stopped, but she finished the thought. "Or we'll be dead. I know. I've made peace with both possibilities." She touched his arm briefly, a gesture of connection that sent warmth through him despite the cold. "But if we're going to die today, I'm glad it'll be trying to reach safety rather than giving up. And I'm glad I won't be alone." Something in her words unlocked something in him, and before he could think better of it, Caleb reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. A gesture so intimate, so familiar, that it shocked them both. His hand lingered for just a moment against her cheek, and Clara's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Clara, He started to speak, to say something about how she'd changed everything in just a few days, how she'd made him remember what it felt like to want more than just survival. But the words stuck in his throat, tangled with 8 years of grief and fear and the bone-deep certainty that anything he loved would be torn away. "I know," she said softly, saving him from having to finish. "I feel it too. This thing between us, whatever it is, and it terrifies me because it's too fast, too intense, too much given everything we're facing. But it's real, Caleb. I can't pretend it isn't. We barely know each other. I know you've been shot protecting me. I know you have nightmares about losing your wife. I know you think you're too broken to deserve happiness, but you're wrong." Her hand came up to cover his where it still rested against her face. "I know that in 3 days you've shown me more genuine humanity than most of the so-called gentlemen I've known in years. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," he admitted, his voice rough. "That's what scares me. If I let myself care about you, really care, and something happens, then you'll grieve, and you'll hurt, and eventually you'll heal, just like before." Her thumb traced small circles on the back of his hand. "But at least you'll have tried, Caleb. At least you'll have lived instead of just existed. Isn't that better than spending the rest of your life alone because you're too afraid to risk your heart?" He wanted to argue, to explain all the reasons why keeping his distance was safer, smarter, more sensible, But standing there in the gray dawn light with her hand warm on his and her eyes seeing straight through every defense he'd built, all those reasons felt hollow. "We should move," he said finally, stepping back, breaking the contact because if he didn't, he might do something foolish like kiss her, and kissing her would make everything that came after infinitely more complicated. Long ride ahead. If Clara was disappointed by his retreat, she didn't show it. She simply nodded and prepared to mount, accepting his help up onto Ash with a grace that suggested she understood the delicate dance they were performing, moving closer while pretending to maintain distance, acknowledging feelings while refusing to act on them until survival was less uncertain. They rode through the morning as the sun climbed higher and the forest began to thin, giving way to more open country studded with rock formations that looked like ancient giants frozen mid-stride. The landscape was beautiful and treacherous in equal measure, offering both cover and countless places for ambush. Around midday, Caleb reined Ash to a stop on a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Below them, a trail cut through the valley floor following a creek that sparkled in the sunlight. It was the most direct route to Copper Ridge, and also the most dangerous. "What do you see?" Clara asked, following his gaze. "Too many places to hide. That rock outcropping on the left, the trees clustered on the right. Even the creek itself is deep enough to provide cover." He pulled out his spyglass, scanning methodically. "If I were setting an ambush, this is where I'd do it." "So we go around?" "Going around adds hours, maybe another full day, and they might have people watching the alternate routes too." He lowered the spyglass, weighing options that all carried risk. "We could wait until dark, try to slip through under cover of night. Or we could just ride through and dare them to try something." Claire's voice was steady, but he felt the tension in her body where she pressed against him. "They don't know we're aware they might be waiting. That gives us some advantage. It gives us the advantage of not being surprised. Doesn't help much when bullets start flying." "Then what do you suggest?" Caleb studied the valley, his mind running through scenarios, calculating odds, trying to find the option that kept them both breathing. "We go through, but we go smart. I'll ride down first, alone. If they're waiting, they'll show themselves when they see I don't have you with me. That'll give you time to—" "Absolutely not." Clara's voice was sharp. "We've been through this, Caleb. We're not splitting up, and you're not sacrificing yourself so I can escape. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's not tactical, that's emotional." "It's both." She twisted in the saddle, forcing him to meet her eyes. "And you can argue all you want about strategy and survival, but I'm not budging on this. We ride together, or we don't ride at all." He wanted to be angry with her for being stubborn, for refusing to accept the smart play. But looking at her face, fierce and determined and absolutely unwilling to compromise, he found he couldn't muster the anger. Instead, he felt something dangerously close to pride. "You're going to get us both killed with this partnership nonsense." "Maybe, but at least we'll die with our principles intact." She smiled slightly. "Besides, you're the one who said you always expect trouble, so expect it now and plan accordingly." He shook his head, but found himself planning anyway, his tactical mind adapting to the constraint of keeping them together. "All right, we go through fast, but not so fast we look like we're running. I'll keep Ash to the right side of the trail where we've got better sight lines and quicker access to cover. If shooting starts, I put you behind that boulder there." He pointed to a massive rock formation about halfway through the valley. "And I'll deal with the shooters. And if there are too many for you to deal with alone, then you use that shooting skill you mentioned, and you help. But Clara," he turned to face her fully, "if I tell you to run, if things go completely sideways, you have to promise me you'll try. Not for me, for yourself. Your father needs you. The people you want to help in Copper Ridge need you. Don't throw your life away for pride." She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. Finally, she nodded. "I promise I'll try, but I'm also promising that I'll do everything I can to make sure it doesn't come to that." It wasn't the unconditional agreement he'd wanted, but it was all he was going to get. He turned Ash toward the valley trail, every sense on high alert, his hand resting on his rifle, ready to draw and fire in one smooth motion if needed. They descended slowly, and with each step Caleb felt the weight of unseen eyes, the crawling sensation between his shoulder blades that told him they were being watched. The valley was too quiet. No birds, no small animals rustling in the brush, just the sound of Ash's hooves and the murmur of the creek. They were halfway through when he saw it. A flash of sunlight on metal from the rocks on the left, there and gone in an instant. His hand tightened on the rifle, and Clara must have felt the change in his posture because she went very still against him. "They're here," he said quietly. "When I move, you hold on tight and don't let go no matter what happens." "Caleb!" The shot came before she could finish, the crack of a rifle echoing off the valley walls. The bullet struck a rock 3 feet to their right, sending stone chips flying, a warning shot, not meant to kill. "Whitlock!" The shout came from the rocks, and Caleb recognized Hadley's voice. "That's far enough!" Caleb reined Ash to a halt, his mind already calculating distances, angles, odds. 3 men that he could see, probably more hidden, bad odds, but not impossible. "Let us pass, Hadley. This doesn't have to end in more blood." "Oh, but it does." Hadley stepped out from behind cover, rifle trained on them, and Caleb could see the rage burning in the young man's eyes. "See? You killed 2 of my boys back at that ambush. Good men, friends. That's a debt that needs paying. They tried to kidnap a woman. They got what they earned. They got what your bullets gave them." Hadley moved closer, and Caleb saw 2 more men emerge from cover, flanking them. "Now here's what's going to happen. The girl comes with us. We have a conversation with her father about restitution. You ride away and live to see another sunrise. Fair trade." "Not happening." Caleb's voice was flat, final. "Find another way to settle your grievance with Beaumont." "There is no other way." Hadley's control slipped, revealing the desperation beneath the bravado. "He took everything from us, our land, our livelihood, our family home that we'd worked 3 generations to build. My mother died of shame, couldn't bear the humiliation of being turned out. My father drank himself to death within a year. So yeah, Whitlock, I think taking his precious daughter and making him feel a fraction of what he made us feel is pretty damn fair." Behind him, Caleb felt Clara straighten. "Mr. Hadley, I can't change what my father did to your family, but taking me won't bring your parents back. It won't restore your land, it'll just make you a criminal and give my father justification for hunting you down like an animal. Is that really how you want your family's story to end?" "Our story ended when your father signed those foreclosure papers." But there was something in Hadley's voice now, doubt, or maybe just exhaustion. "You don't get it, Miss Beaumont. You probably never had to worry about where your next meal was coming from or how you'd survive the winter. You've lived your whole life wrapped in money we helped provide through our mortgage payments." "You're right," Clara said, and Caleb felt surprise ripple through him. "I've never known that kind of hardship. I've been privileged in ways I'm only beginning to understand. But Mr. Hadley, and please, look at me when I say this, I am not my father. If you let us reach Copper Ridge, I give you my word I'll review your family's case. If there's any way to make restitution, to restore even part of what was taken, I'll do it." "Your word?" Hadley laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Why would I trust the word of a Beaumont?" "Because I'm all you've got," Clara replied simply. "You can take me now, hold me for ransom, and probably get nothing but a manhunt that ends with you dead or in prison. Or you can take a chance that I mean what I say, that I'm different from my father, that there might be a way forward that doesn't end in more death. It's your choice, Mr. Hadley. Choose vengeance or choose hope." The valley fell silent except for the creek's murmur and the whisper of wind through sage. Caleb's finger rested on the rifle trigger, ready to move if Hadley's answer was bullets instead of words. He could feel Clara's heartbeat through her back, fast but steady. Could feel the courage it took for her to offer mercy to men who'd tried to kill her. Hadley's rifle wavered just slightly, and Caleb saw the young man's resolve cracking. But then one of his companions, a hard-faced man with a scar across his throat, spat into the dust. "This is horseshit, Marcus. We came here for justice, not to listen to pretty speeches from some rich girl who thinks words fix everything." "Shut up, Cole," Hadley said, but there was no force behind it. "No, I won't shut up. We've been riding for days, lost good men, all for what? So you can get soft because she's pretty and talks nice?" Cole raised his rifle, and Caleb saw murder in his eyes. "I say we take her now and settle this the way we planned." Everything happened at once. Cole's finger tightened on the trigger. Caleb threw himself sideways, taking Clara with him as they tumbled from Ash's back. The rifle cracked and the bullet passed through the space where Clara's head had been a heartbeat before. Caleb hit the ground rolling, coming up with his Colt drawn, firing twice. Cole went down screaming, clutching his shoulder. Then the valley erupted in gunfire. Hadley and his remaining man were shooting, but shooting wild, caught off guard by how fast everything had gone to hell. Caleb grabbed Clara's arm and hauled her behind the boulder he'd marked earlier, bullets chewing the ground around them. Ash bolted, panicked by the gunfire, and Caleb felt his heart sink. Without the horse, they were trapped. "Stay down!" He rose just enough to return fire, his bullets forcing Hadley's man back into cover. 3 rounds left in the Colt. He couldn't afford to miss. Beside him, Clara had pulled a small pistol from somewhere in her skirts, a Derringer, barely useful beyond a few feet, but better than nothing. "Tell me when," she said, her voice shaking but her hand steady on the weapon. "Not yet. Save your shots." He ejected the spent cartridges, reloaded with practiced speed, his fingers working on instinct while his mind calculated their dwindling options. They could hold this position for a while, but eventually Hadley's men would flank them or simply wait them out. Without horses, without water, pinned down in the open, they'd last maybe until nightfall before dehydration and exhaustion made them easy targets. Another bullet struck the boulder, showering them with stone chips. Clara flinched but held her position, and Caleb found himself marveling at her composure even as he cursed the circumstances that had brought them here. "Whitlock!" Hadley's voice carried across the valley. "You're trapped. No horse, no escape route, and we've got plenty of ammunition. Give us the girl and walk away." "Go to hell!" Caleb shouted back, firing twice more at a flicker of movement. One of the shots connected. He heard a yelp of pain. "Good. Make them pay for every inch." "Caleb," Claire's voice was quiet, meant only for him. "That offer I made, about reviewing their case. I meant it. If we get out of this, I'll find a way to help them." "I know you meant it. That's why I'm not letting them take you." He checked his ammunition again. 4 rounds left. 4 rounds between them and death. "But Clara, if this goes bad, don't." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "Don't you dare start saying goodbyes. We're getting out of this because we have to, because you promised me coffee and a real bed in Copper Ridge, because I'm not done arguing with you about whether you're going to stay or leave, because," her voice broke slightly, "because I'm not ready to say goodbye to you yet." Something in her words steadied him, gave him focus beyond simple survival. He'd spent 8 years not caring whether he lived or died, treating each day as borrowed time. But Clara had somehow made him care again, made him want a future instead of just an ending. "All right," he said, and kissed her. It was brief, fierce, tasting of dust and fear and desperate hope. When they broke apart, Clara's eyes were wide with surprise, but also something that looked like joy. What was that for? "In case I don't get another chance." He turned back to their tactical situation, but now there was fire in his chest, determination beyond mere stubbornness. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to draw their fire, move along the rocks to their left. While they're shooting at me, you're going to run for that cluster of trees by the creek. It's better cover, closer to the trail out of here. And leave you to face 3 armed men alone?" 2 armed men. I hit one pretty solid, and I'm not planning to face them. I'm planning to disappear into those rocks and work my way around behind them. Classic flanking maneuver. He checked his rifle, made sure the action was smooth. "But I need you safe first, Clara. I need to know you're in cover so I can focus on staying alive." "This is another sacrifice play." "No, it's tactics. Trust me." He met her eyes. "Please." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Don't you dare die, Caleb Whitlock. Because if you do, I'll find a way to follow you to wherever dead people go, and I'll be very angry with you there." "Noted." He took a breath, preparing himself. "On 3. 1, 2. The sound of hoofbeats thundered into the valley, cutting off his count. Both of them turned to see riders cresting the ridge, 6 men, maybe more, riding hard toward the firefight. For one terrible moment, Caleb thought it was reinforcements for Hadley, that they were well and truly doomed. Then he saw the badge glinting on the lead rider's chest and felt hope surge through him like lightning. "Marshal!" he shouted. Federal Marshal, we've got civilians pinned down. The effect was instantaneous. Hadley's remaining men broke from cover, running for their horses, abandoning the fight in the face of federal law enforcement. Hadley himself hesitated, looking at Clara with something that might have been regret or rage, or both, then turned and fled. The marshals pursued, their rifles cracking as they gave chase, and suddenly the valley was empty except for the wounded man Cole groaning on the ground and the thunder of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Caleb slumped against the boulder, adrenaline draining out of him all at once, leaving him shaking. Beside him, Clara started laughing, not hysterical, just the giddy relief of people who'd expected to die and found themselves still breathing. "Coffee and a real bed," she said between laughs. "You promised me coffee and a real bed." "I did," he agreed, and found himself laughing too, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. "And I'm a man of my word." One of the marshals, an older man with a grizzled beard and eyes that had seen too much, rode back to them, dismounting with the stiffness of someone who'd spent too many hours in the saddle. "You folks all right?" "Alive," Caleb said, which seemed like answer enough. "How'd you find us?" "Old driver named Silas made it to Copper Ridge 2 days ago, half dead from pushing his team but alive enough to tell Thomas Beaumont his daughter was in danger. Beaumont raised holy hell, and the sheriff sent for us." The marshal looked at Clara. "You'd be Miss Beaumont, I take it?" "I am." Clara stood, brushing dust from her dress in that habitual gesture, trying to restore some dignity. "And this is Caleb Whitlock. He saved my life more times than I can count in the past 3 days." "Then I reckon the territory owes you thanks, Mr. Whitlock." The marshal extended his hand and Caleb shook it, still trying to process the fact that they'd survived. "We'll get you both to Copper Ridge, get you cleaned up and fed. Might need statements about what happened here, but that can wait until you've rested." Ash had returned, drawn by the familiar sound of Caleb's voice, and the stallion nuzzled his shoulder as if to say he'd only run away strategically. Caleb stroked the horse's neck, grateful beyond words for the animal's survival. The ride to Copper Ridge took 3 hours, surrounded by federal marshals and safe in a way they hadn't been since leaving Willow Creek. Clara dozed against Caleb's shoulder, exhausted past the point of caring about propriety, and he found himself memorizing the weight of her, the warmth, the simple reality of another person trusting him enough to be vulnerable. The town appeared as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, bigger than Willow Creek, more established, with actual streets and buildings that looked permanent rather than temporary. People lined the main street as they rode in, drawn by news of the Beaumont girl's return, and Caleb saw a well-dressed man pushing through the crowd, his face a mixture of relief and fury. "Clara!" Thomas Beaumont was a big man, broad-shouldered and imposing, with iron-gray hair and eyes that probably missed nothing in a balance sheet. But right now those eyes were bright with tears as he reached up to help his daughter down. "My God, Clara, I thought, when Silas told me—" "I'm all right, Father." Clara embraced him, and Caleb saw her shoulders shake as she finally let herself feel the full weight of what they'd been through. "I'm all right now." Beaumont held his daughter for a long moment, then looked up at Caleb with eyes that assessed and calculated even through emotion. "You're Whitlock, the guard Brennan hired." "Yes, sir." "Silas said you saved her life. Said you fought off an ambush and got her out when the coach was compromised." "I did my job." "You did more than your job." Beaumont's voice was gruff. "You have my gratitude, Mr. Whitlock, and my debt. Whatever you need, money, work, a place to stay, you name it and it's yours." Caleb should have taken the money and left. That was the smart play, the safe play, the one that kept his heart locked away where it couldn't be broken again. But as he looked at Clara standing beside her father, her eyes finding his across the small distance, he heard himself saying something entirely different. "I could use work, actually, the kind that keeps me in one place for a while." Something lit in Clara's face, hope, joy, relief, and Beaumont noticed, his eyes sharpening as he looked between them. But whatever he saw there, he kept his thoughts to himself, simply nodding. "I'm sure we can arrange something. Sheriff's getting old, could use a deputy, or there are other options." He put his arm around Clara. "But right now, let's get you both cleaned up. Plenty of time for business tomorrow." The next few hours passed in a blur of hot baths, hot food, and finally, blessedly, a real bed in a real hotel room. Caleb collapsed into it fully dressed, too tired to even remove his boots, and slept for 12 hours straight without nightmares. When he woke, the sun was high, and there was a note slipped under his door. Clara's handwriting he recognized from the educated loops and careful penmanship. "Meet me at the church at sunset. There's something I want to show you." C. He spent the day wandering Copper Ridge, getting his bearings, learning the rhythms of a place he might actually stay for more than a week. It was a good town, he decided. Growing but not too fast, civilized but still rough enough around the edges to feel real, the kind of place a man could build a life if he was brave enough to try. The church sat at the eastern edge of town, a simple white building with a cross on top and a small cemetery behind it. Clara was waiting on the steps, wearing a simple blue dress that made her eyes look like spring itself, and Caleb felt his breath catch at the sight of her. "You came," she said, smiling. "You asked." He climbed the steps to stand beside her. "What did you want to show me?" Instead of answering, she took his hand and led him around the church to the cemetery, stopping at a plot near the back where new grass was beginning to grow. 2 headstones stood side by side. Daniel Morrison, beloved son and fiancé, and beneath it, Sarah Whitlock, beloved wife, with dates that matched the fire. Caleb stared at the second headstone, confusion washing through him. "I don't understand. Sarah's buried in Abilene." "She is," Clara confirmed. "But I asked my father to have this made anyway, a memorial, not a grave. Because I think you need a place to say goodbye, Caleb, a place to tell her that you survived, that you're going to keep surviving, that you're going to try to be happy again, even though she's gone." His throat closed up, emotion hitting him like a fist. "Why would you do this?" "Because you can't move forward while you're still trapped in the past. And because," Claire's voice softened, "because I'm falling in love with you, Caleb Whitlock, and I think you might be falling in love with me too. But neither of us can fully embrace that until you've made peace with what you lost." She was right. God help him. She was absolutely right. For 8 years, he'd been carrying Sarah's death like a weight chained to his chest, using his grief as armor against the world. But standing here, looking at this memorial Clara had created out of kindness and hope and understanding, he felt the chains beginning to loosen. "I don't know what to say to her," he admitted. "Say whatever's in your heart." Clara squeezed his hand once, then stepped away, giving him privacy. Caleb stood before the memorial, words rising and falling in his mind like tides. Finally, he knelt, placing his hand on the cool stone, and spoke. "I'm sorry, Sarah. Sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry I let grief turn me into someone who just existed instead of lived. Sorry I've been so afraid of losing again that I stopped trying to find." His voice cracked. "But I think maybe I've found someone who makes me want to try again. Someone who sees past all my damage and thinks I might still be worth saving. I think you'd like her. I think you'd tell me to stop being a stubborn fool and take the chance while I've got it." The words hung in the evening air, and Caleb felt something break inside him. Not a bad break, but the kind that lets new growth through. He'd loved Sarah with everything he had, and her death had nearly destroyed him. But Clara was right. Sarah wouldn't have wanted him to spend the rest of his life alone, trapped in the past, refusing to embrace whatever future remained. She would have wanted him to live. He stood, wiping his eyes unselfconsciously, and turned to find Clara watching him with such tenderness that it took his breath away. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're welcome." She came to stand beside him, looking at the memorial. "I know it doesn't fix everything. Grief doesn't work that way. But maybe it's a start." "It is." He took her hand, threading their fingers together, feeling the rightness of it. "Clara, when you said you're falling in love with me, I meant it, every word." She turned to face him fully. "I know it's fast. I know it's probably foolish. I know we've only known each other a handful of days, and most of them involved someone trying to kill us. But I also know what I feel when I look at you, when you look at me. This is real, Caleb. Maybe it won't last. Maybe we'll discover we're too different, or too damaged, or too something. But maybe it'll be everything. And I'd rather try and fail than never try at all." Caleb pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine and hope. I'm falling in love with you too. Have been since you stepped out of that stagecoach looking fierce and fearless. Maybe before, if I'm honest. And it scares me to death." "Good," Clara whispered, "because it scares me too. But maybe being scared together is better than being safe alone." He kissed her then, properly this time. Not a desperate gesture in the face of death, but a promise of life, of possibility, of two broken people choosing to be brave enough to try again. And when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara smiled against his mouth. "So you're staying?" "I'm staying," he confirmed. "At least for a while, see how it goes. That's all I ask." She took his hand again, leading him back toward town, toward the future, toward whatever came next. "Just a chance, Caleb. That's all either of us needs. Just a chance." Behind them, the sun set in glory over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Caleb Whitlock walked toward tomorrow, with hope in his heart, and a woman who believed in him at his side. It wasn't the ending he'd expected when he'd taken a job protecting a banker's daughter for $50. It was so much better. The chance Clara spoke of arrived sooner than either of them expected, delivered not in the gentle unfolding of courtship, but in the hard realities of a frontier town trying to maintain order against forces that recognized no law but their own. 3 days after they'd walked away from that cemetery hand in hand, Caleb stood in Thomas Beaumont's office, listening to a proposal that would test everything he'd just promised himself about staying, about trying, about being brave enough to build instead of just survive. "Hadley's still out there," Beaumont said, spreading a map across his mahogany desk with fingers that trembled slightly, the only sign of the fear he'd been carrying since his daughter's near abduction. "The marshals caught 2 of his men, but Hadley himself escaped. He's wounded, desperate, and he knows this territory better than anyone tracking him." "And you think he'll come back?" Caleb studied the map, noting the terrain features, the places a man could hide, the routes he might use to approach town unseen. "I know he'll come back." Beaumont's voice was flat with certainty. "He's got nothing left to lose, and everything he's lost points back to me. To us. The marshals are stretched thin across 3 territories, and our sheriff, God bless him, is 72 and hasn't fired his gun in anger in a decade. We need someone who can protect this town, who can protect Clara." The words hung between them, and Caleb understood this was a test as much as an offer. Beaumont was asking if he'd stay not just for the easy parts, the courtship, the possibility of love, the chance at happiness, but for the hard parts too. The danger, the responsibility, the weight of other lives depending on his choices. "What exactly are you offering?" "Deputy position. Reports to the sheriff in name, but in practice you'd have full authority to organize the town's defense, train volunteers, do whatever needs doing to keep people safe." Beaumont named a salary that was more than fair, then added, "plus room and board at the hotel, and the use of my stable for your horse. No contract, no obligation beyond the immediate threat. If you want to leave when this is over, you leave. No hard feelings. And if I want to stay?" Something flickered in Beaumont's eyes. Calculation, assessment, the measuring look of a father evaluating a potential suitor for his daughter. "Then we'll talk about more permanent arrangements. But let's deal with the present danger first, shall we?" Caleb extended his hand. "You've got yourself a deputy, Mr. Beaumont." The handshake was firm, sealing an agreement that felt like more than just employment. As Caleb turned to leave, Beaumont's voice stopped him at the door. "Whitlock, my daughter, she's all I have left in this world. Her mother died when Clara was 16, and I've built everything since then with the thought of leaving her something solid, something that would keep her safe and provided for." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "I see how she looks at you, how you look at her, and I won't pretend I'm not concerned about a gunfighter courting my daughter, but I also saw you keep her alive when most men would have run. That counts for something. I'm not going to hurt her, sir." "You say that now, but life has a way of hurting people whether they intend it or not." Beaumont met his eyes. "Just promise me you'll try." "That's all any of us can do, try our best and hope it's enough." "I promise." And Caleb meant it with every scarred, damaged part of his heart. He found Clara an hour later at the construction site of the new schoolhouse her father was funding, her sleeves rolled up, arguing with the foreman about window placement. She'd discarded the fine dresses of the past few days in favor of practical work clothes, and there was sawdust in her hair and determination in her eyes. "The windows need to be higher," she was saying, gesturing at the framed walls. "If they're too low, the children will spend all their time looking outside instead of at their lessons. And we need better ventilation. This room will be unbearable in summer with 40 children packed in here." The foreman, a weathered man named Hicks, who'd probably been building things since before Clara was born, looked torn between irritation and admiration. "Miss Beaumont, with all respect, your father hired me to build this schoolhouse, and I've built 7 others just like it. They're fine the way they are." Fine isn't good enough. These children deserve better than fine. Clara caught sight of Caleb, and her expression softened, though the steel in her voice remained. "Mr. Hicks, we'll continue this discussion later. I need to speak with Mr. Whitlock." Hicks looked relieved to escape, tipping his hat to Caleb as he passed. "Good luck with that one. She's as stubborn as her father." "I heard that," Clara called after him, but she was smiling. When she turned to Caleb, the smile deepened. "You're wearing a badge." He looked down at the tin star pinned to his chest, still uncomfortable with its weight. "Your father made me deputy, wants me to prepare the town in case Hadley comes back." The smile faded. "He will come back, won't he?" "Probably." There was no point in sugarcoating reality. Men like Hadley, when they've lost everything, they fixate on the thing they think caused that loss. Right now, that's you and your father. The marshals wounded him during the chase. We found blood on the trail, but not badly enough to stop him. He's out there somewhere, healing up, planning his next move. Clara moved closer, her hand finding his, and Caleb marveled at how natural the gesture had become in just a few days. "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," he admitted. "But not of Hadley. I'm afraid of failing, of letting him hurt you or your father or anyone else in this town, of proving that I'm not actually capable of protecting the things I care about." "You saved me 3 times in as many days, Caleb. You're more than capable." "Saving you when it's just the 2 of us on the trail is different from protecting a whole town. This is bigger, more complex, more ways for things to go wrong." He squeezed her hand, drawing strength from the contact. "But I'm going to try. That's all I can promise. I'll try my best and hope it's enough." "It will be." She said it with such certainty that he almost believed her. "Because you're not doing this alone. I'll help however I can." "Clara, don't." She cut him off with a look. "We've already had this conversation, remember? We're partners. That doesn't change just because the danger does. Tell me what you need." What he needed was for her to stay safe behind locked doors while he dealt with armed men intent on violence. But looking at her face, fierce and determined and absolutely unwilling to be sidelined, he knew that particular battle was already lost. So instead he told her the truth. "I need to know who in this town can shoot, who can keep their head in a crisis, who'll run, and who'll stand. I need to know every building, every sight line, every place Hadley might use for ambush or escape. I need supplies. Ammunition, medical provisions, extra rifles for volunteers. And I need—" He hesitated, then continued. "I need you to teach me about the people here, the relationships, the grudges, the alliances. Because if Hadley's smart, he won't come at us directly. He'll find the weak points, the divisions, the places where this town is vulnerable." Clara nodded slowly, her mind clearly already working through the implications. "I can do that. I grew up here, know most of the families. And I've been working at the bank with my father for the past 2 days, reviewing accounts and loan histories. I'm learning exactly who owes what to whom, who's struggling, who might be angry enough to help an outsider settle a score. You think someone in town might side with Hadley? I think my father has made enemies over the years. Not many, and most of them are decent people who just got caught in bad circumstances. But desperation makes people do things they wouldn't otherwise consider." She was quiet for a moment, then, "There's a family on the edge of town, the Hendersons. Father foreclosed on them 6 months ago. They're living in a shack now, barely scraping by. The husband, William, he drinks too much and talks about how Beaumont ruined him. If Hadley approached him, offered money, or just the chance for revenge, we need to know." Caleb's mind was already shifting into tactical mode, seeing the town not as a place to live but as a battlefield to defend. "Can you make a list? Everyone who might have reason to help Hadley, even indirectly. I'll need to talk to them, get a sense of where they stand." I'll have it for you by tomorrow. Clara looked around at the half-built schoolhouse, the future it represented. Do you think we're going to survive this, Caleb? Really survive? Not just make it through by the skin of our teeth, but actually build something lasting here? I don't know, he said honestly. But I know we're going to try, and maybe trying is enough. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking through Copper Ridge, with Clara pointing out the key locations and residents, while Caleb committed everything to memory. The general store owned by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who'd lost her husband in the war and had no love for violence. The saloon run by a former cavalry sergeant named Briggs, who kept order with a shotgun and a hard stare. The livery stable managed by a freed slave named Samuel, who could shoot a rifle better than most men who'd carried one in combat. The church where Reverend Morrison, Daniel's father, Clara explained quietly, preached forgiveness but kept a Winchester behind the pulpit because forgiveness didn't stop bullets. By evening, Caleb had a rough map in his mind of Copper Ridge's strengths and weaknesses, its potential allies and possible threats. He'd also gained a deeper understanding of why Clara loved this town despite its flaws. These were real people living real lives, trying to build something permanent in a land that resisted permanence. They deserved protection, deserved someone willing to stand between them and the violence that seemed to follow wherever men carried grievances and guns. That night, sitting in the hotel dining room over steaks and coffee, Clara showed him the list she'd promised. 12 names, each with a brief notation about their circumstances and potential loyalty. The Hendersons, I mentioned. The Talbots. They lost their son in a bar fight that started over a gambling debt to my father. The Yates family. Father's in jail in Denver for passing bad checks, mother's struggling alone with 3 children. The Morgans. She paused, her expression troubled. Actually, scratch the Morgans. I talked to Elizabeth Morgan this afternoon. She's angry, yes, but she's also trying to rebuild. She wouldn't risk what little she has left on revenge. Caleb studied the list, committing each name to memory. I'll start talking to them tomorrow, quietly, just feeling out where they stand. If any of them are working with Hadley, I need to know before he makes his move. And if they are, then I'll deal with it, hopefully without violence, but he met her eyes. I won't let anyone hurt you or your father, Clara, whatever it takes. She reached across the table, taking his hand. Just promise me you won't become the kind of man who sees enemies everywhere, who lets suspicion poison everything good. That's not surviving, Caleb. That's just another kind of dying. I promise. And he meant it, though he also knew that promises made in peacetime were sometimes harder to keep when violence came calling. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Caleb organized town volunteers into a rough militia, teaching them basic defensive tactics and positioning. He reinforced the sheriff's office, turning it into a strong point that could withstand assault. He rode the perimeter of town, identifying the likely approaches an attacker might use and setting up early warning systems, bells that could be rung, signals that could be given. He talked to each person on Clara's list, gauging their anger and their loyalty, trying to assess whether any of them were desperate or damaged enough to betray their neighbors for the sake of revenge. Most were exactly what Clara had said, decent people caught in bad circumstances, angry at Beaumont, but not murderous, wanting justice, but not at the cost of innocent lives. William Henderson was bitter and drunk, but when Caleb talked to him, really talked, listening instead of interrogating, he heard beneath the anger a man who just wanted his dignity back. The Talbots grieved their son, but blamed the man who'd killed him, not the banker who'd sparked the argument. The Yates family was too focused on survival to worry about revenge. But there was one name that troubled Caleb, one conversation that left him uneasy even though nothing specific was said. Jacob Winters owned a small ranch north of town, and he'd lost it to Beaumont's foreclosure 8 months ago. Unlike the others, Winters didn't seem angry. He was calm, almost pleasant when Caleb visited, offering coffee and talking about the weather and the price of cattle. But his eyes were cold, and there was something in the way he spoke about Beaumont, not rage, but something colder, more calculated, that set off every alarm Caleb had learned to trust during his years of staying alive by reading people. He's going to be a problem, Caleb told Clara that night as they sat on the hotel porch, watching the stars emerge. I can't prove anything, but I'd bet my last dollar he's either already helping Hadley or waiting for the right moment to make his move. Jacob Winters? Clara frowned. He always seemed so reasonable. Even when father foreclosed, he didn't make a scene, just packed up his family and moved into town without any drama. That's what worries me. Everyone else wore their anger on their sleeves. Winters buried his, which means it's either gone or it's festering into something worse. Caleb lit a cigarette, watching the smoke rise into the darkness. I'm going to have the sheriff assign someone to watch him, discreetly. Do you really think Hadley's close? I know he is. I can feel it. He'd learned over the years to trust the crawling sensation between his shoulder blades, the instinct that said danger was near even when no evidence supported it. He's been out there for 2 weeks now. That's long enough to heal, to plan, to find whoever he's going to use as inside help. It's almost time, Clara. Whatever's coming, it's coming soon. She moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder, and Caleb wrapped his arm around her, drawing comfort from her presence. In the 2 weeks since that kiss at the cemetery, they'd fallen into a relationship that felt both new and ancient, tentative in some ways, assured in others, always aware of the danger surrounding them, but refusing to let that danger dictate their lives. I've been thinking, Clara said quietly, about after. When this is done, one way or another. What do you want, Caleb? Really want. Not just what you think you should want or what's safe to want. What does your future look like? It was a question he'd been avoiding, afraid that imagining a future might jinx his chances of living long enough to have one. But sitting there with Clara warm against him and the night peaceful around them, he found himself answering honestly. I want mornings where I wake up next to someone who knows my worst stories and chooses to stay anyway. I want work that matters, that helps people instead of just keeping me alive. I want... He paused, then continued softly. I want a home, Clara. Not just a place to sleep, but a home. Somewhere I belong, somewhere I don't have to leave. That sounds perfect. Her voice was thick with emotion. And maybe that home could have a garden and a porch where we'd sit on summer evenings. And maybe eventually there'd be children running through it, filling it with noise and life. Is that what you want? With you? Yes. She turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the lamplight from the hotel windows. I know it's fast. I know we're probably supposed to court for a year or two, let society approve and my father investigate your prospects. But we've already faced death together, Caleb. We've already seen each other at our worst and our best. What more do we need to know? Nothing, he said, and kissed her, tasting the future on her lips, coffee and possibility, and the brave, foolish hope that maybe this time, this love, would be the one that lasted. They were still kissing when the church bell began to ring, the urgent clanging that signaled danger, and Caleb felt his blood turn to ice. Stay here, he said, already moving, his hand on his gun. Like hell! Clara was right behind him as he ran toward the sound, toward whatever crisis had triggered the alarm. They found Samuel from the livery stable in the street, breathing hard, his shirt soaked with blood from a gash on his arm. Winters, he gasped. Jacob Winters. He's got men at his ranch. Saw them when I was riding back from the Patterson place. At least 6, maybe more. They're armed, Caleb, armed and watching the town. Did they see you? One of them took a shot at me when I got too close. That's how I got this. He gestured at his arm. But I rode hard, got back here to warn you. They're coming, Caleb. Tonight, I bet my life on it. Caleb's mind raced through options, tactics, the dozen different ways this could go wrong. Clara, get your father. Get him somewhere safe. The bank vault, it's the strongest structure in town. Samuel, round up everyone we trained. I want them armed and at their positions in 15 minutes. What are you going to do? Clara's voice was steady, but he could hear the fear beneath it. I'm going to end this. He checked his guns, made sure he had extra ammunition. Winters made a mistake showing his hand before Hadley made his move. That means we know where at least some of the threat is coming from. I'm going to his ranch, going to make him talk, going to find out where Hadley is and stop this before it turns into a massacre. That's suicide. You can't ride into 6 armed men alone. I've done it before. He cupped her face in his hands, memorizing her features in case he never saw them again. Clara, if I don't come back, no. She grabbed his wrists, her grip fierce. No goodbyes, remember? You're coming back because you promised me a future, and I'm holding you to that promise. Clara, I mean it, Caleb. You don't get to ride off to die heroically because that's not the agreement. The agreement is we both survive. We both build that future. We both get our happy ending. So you go do what you need to do, but you come back. You hear me? You come back. He kissed her hard, pouring everything he felt into that contact, love and fear and desperate hope. Then he pulled away, whistled for Ash, and swung into the saddle. I'll come back, he promised, and prayed he could keep his word. The ride to Winter's ranch took 20 minutes through darkness broken only by starlight. Caleb approached from downwind, moving slowly, using every scrap of cover. He could see lights in the ranch house, shadows moving behind curtains. Samuel had been right. There were men here, armed men, waiting for something, waiting for Hadley's signal to attack. Caleb dismounted 100 yards out, leaving Ash ground-tied in a stand of cottonwoods. He moved forward on foot, his rifle in his hands, every sense alert for sentries. He found the first one smoking behind the barn. A young man, nervous, probably hired for a few dollars and the promise of easy money. Caleb took him down silently, leaving him unconscious but alive, gagged and tied with rope from his saddle. The second sentry was more alert, positioned where he could watch both the house and the approach from town. Caleb had to circle wide, using a dry creek bed for cover before he could get close enough. When he moved, it was fast and brutal. A blow to the temple that dropped the man like a stone. 2 down. At least 4 more inside, plus Winters himself. Not good odds, but he'd faced worse. The ranch house had a back door that led into the kitchen. Caleb tried the handle, locked. He could kick it in, but that would alert everyone inside. Instead, he used his knife on the latch, working it carefully until he felt the mechanism give. The kitchen was dark and empty, smelling of old coffee and older secrets. Caleb moved through it silently, his boots making no sound on the wooden floor, every nerve screaming that this was a trap, that he was walking into something worse than he knew. He heard voices from the front room, men talking, arguing about timing and tactics and how much Beaumont was worth dead versus alive. And beneath those voices, another sound that made his blood freeze. A woman crying, begging. Winter's wife, he realized. Jacob Winter's wife, pleading with her husband not to do this, not to throw away everything for revenge. It's already done, Margaret, Winters said, his voice cold and flat. Beaumont took everything from us. Now I'm taking everything from him. His bank, his town, his precious daughter. By dawn, he'll know what it feels like to lose everything you built. This won't bring back what we lost. It'll just make everything worse. It'll make me feel better. That's enough. Caleb eased around the corner, taking in the scene. 5 men in the front room, all armed, standing around a table covered with maps and weapons. Winters at the head of the table, his face hard and set. And in the corner, Margaret Winters tied to a chair, her face wet with tears. He could shoot Winters from here. 1 bullet, end the immediate threat. But the other 4 men would return fire, and Margaret was in the line of fire. And even if he survived, he'd never know where Hadley was or when the main attack was coming. So instead, he stepped into the doorway, his rifle trained on Winters, and said clearly, "Nobody move." 5 guns swung toward him, 5 men frozen by surprise, and for a moment Caleb thought he might actually pull this off without bloodshed. Then one of the men, young, stupid, or both, went for his pistol, and the room erupted in violence. Caleb shot him first, the bullet taking him in the shoulder and spinning him around. He worked the lever, shot again, and another man went down. The other 2 dove for cover, returning fire, and bullets tore through the walls around Caleb's head. He rolled behind a heavy cabinet, reloading, his ears ringing from the gunfire in the enclosed space. "Whitlock!" Winter's voice carried over the chaos. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender and I'll let you live." "Not how this works, Winters," Caleb shouted back. "Your men are down, your plan's compromised, and right now the whole town knows you're involved. This is your last chance to end this without more people dying. The town's finished. Hadley's already on his way with 20 men. By morning, Copper Ridge will be ashes and Beaumont will be dead." 20 men. God in heaven, 20 men. Caleb's mind raced, calculating how long it would take to get back to town, how long before the attack came. He needed to end this now, needed to get back and warn everyone, needed... The back door crashed open and Claire's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Everyone stop!" Caleb's heart stopped. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway, her father's rifle in her hands, pointing it at the men in the front room with hands that didn't shake. Behind her, impossibly, Thomas Beaumont stood with his own weapon, his face set with grim determination. "You shouldn't be here," Caleb said, torn between gratitude and fury. "Probably not," Clara agreed, "but we are. So let's deal with what's in front of us. Mr. Winters, you have a choice. You can continue this madness and die here tonight, leaving your wife to mourn you. Or you can put down your gun, tell us where Hadley's coming from, and maybe we can all survive the night." "You think I'll betray Hadley for mercy from a Beaumont?" Winters laughed, but there was desperation in it now. "You don't understand. This isn't just about revenge anymore. Hadley promised me money, real money, enough to start over somewhere else. Promised me I'd be paid for every Beaumont I helped put in the ground." "He lied," Caleb said flatly. "Men like Hadley don't pay their debts. They use people and discard them. You're not his partner, Winters. You're his tool. And when this is over, whether he wins or loses, you'll be dead or in prison while he moves on to the next grudge, the next town, the next fool desperate enough to believe his promises." For the first time, doubt flickered across Winters' face. "You don't know that." "I know exactly that. I've seen men like Hadley before. Hell, I've been men like Hadley before, so focused on what I'd lost that I couldn't see I was destroying any chance of finding something new." Caleb lowered his rifle slightly, not surrendering but offering an opening. "But I also learned that vengeance is just another word for slow suicide. You kill Beaumont, you burn this town, and then what? You think you'll feel better? You think that emptiness inside will fill up? It won't. It'll just get bigger, darker, until there's nothing left of the man you used to be." "He's right, Jacob." Margaret Winters' voice was soft but clear. "Please, I've already lost our home. Don't make me lose you too." The silence stretched like wire pulled too tight, and Caleb could see Winters wavering, caught between the desire for revenge and the reality of its cost. Then, slowly, incredibly, Winters lowered his gun. "East approach," he said quietly. "Hadley's coming from the east, through the canyon. He's got 20 men, like I said. They'll hit just before dawn, when the town's sleeping and the sentries are tired. He's planning to fire the buildings, draw everyone into the street, then cut them down from the hills. It's not about robbery anymore. It's about making Beaumont watch everything he built turn to ash." "How long do we have?" Beaumont asked, speaking for the first time since entering. 2 hours? Maybe 3. Depends on whether they're riding now or waiting for first light." Winters looked at his wife, and there was such regret in his face that Caleb almost felt sorry for him. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm so damn sorry." "Tell that to the sheriff," Beaumont said coldly. "For now, you're going to help us save this town. Because if you think I'm going to show you mercy after you tried to murder my daughter, you're mistaken. But I will let you earn a chance at redemption. Help us stop Hadley, and maybe, the judge will take that into account." They rode back to Copper Ridge at a gallop, Winters tied and riding between Caleb and Samuel, while Clara and her father led the way. Dawn was still hours away, but Caleb could feel time slipping through his fingers like water, each minute bringing them closer to violence he wasn't sure they could survive. The town was awake and armed when they arrived, every volunteer at their position, every rifle loaded and ready. Caleb gathered them quickly, sketching out Hadley's plan and their response. "He's expecting to catch us sleeping, unprepared. Instead, we're going to be waiting. Samuel, take 5 men and position them in the canyon approach. Don't engage. I just need you to slow them down, make some noise, let us know they're coming. Briggs, you and the saloon men hold the main street. Mrs. Patterson, I need you and anyone who can't shoot to get the children and elderly into the church basement. It's stone. It'll survive fire. Reverend Morrison, I'm sorry, but I need that Winchester of yours." "Already loaded," the Reverend said grimly. "The Lord may preach forgiveness, but he also understands justice." Caleb turned to Beaumont. "Sir, I need you in the bank. It's the strongest position, best sightlines, and Hadley will come for you eventually. When he does, I want you somewhere we can defend." "What about Clara?" "I want her safe. I want her as far from the fighting as possible." But even as he said it, Caleb knew it was futile. Clara stood beside him, her father's rifle still in her hands, her jaw set with the same stubborn determination he'd seen when she'd refused to leave him behind during the ambush. "Not happening," she confirmed. "I stay with you. We're partners, remember? We both survive or neither of us does." "Clara, I can shoot, I can reload, and I can watch your back. Those are 3 things you're going to need when 20 armed men come riding into town." She met his eyes. "Stop trying to protect me and let me help you protect everyone else." He wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the bank vault and stand guard until the danger passed. But looking at her face, fierce and brave and absolutely unwilling to be sidelined, he realized that trying to cage her would break something essential in who she was. And he loved her too much to do that, even to keep her safe. "You stay close to me. You don't take risks. And if I tell you to run, you run. Those are the conditions." "Agreed." She stepped closer, kissing him quickly. "Now, let's go save our town." The next 2 hours passed in tense preparation and tenser waiting. Caleb positioned his volunteers carefully, using the buildings for cover, setting up crossfires that would catch Hadley's men in a killing field if they tried to rush the main street. He checked and rechecked everyone's ammunition, their positions, their nerves. Some were scared. He could see it in their eyes, but none ran. They were defending their homes, their families, their futures. That gave them strength that mercenaries and hired guns could never match. Clara stayed beside him through it all, helping where she could, offering encouragement, steady and calm, in a way that made others braver just by her presence. Watching her move through the preparations, Caleb felt his heart clench with love and fear in equal measure. She was everything he'd thought he'd lost forever: hope and kindness, and the belief that tomorrow could be better than today. And now she was standing in harm's way because of choices he'd made, because he'd agreed to protect her and brought her into a war that might destroy them both. "Stop it," she said quietly, reading his face as easily as she read his heart. "Stop blaming yourself for things that haven't happened yet. We're here because we choose to be here, Caleb, both of us. Whatever comes, we face it together." Before he could respond, Samuel came riding hard from the east, his horse lathered and his face urgent. "They're coming! Hadley's men, maybe 15 minutes out. And Caleb, there's more than 20, closer to 30, and they're armed like they're going to war." 30 men. 30 armed men against maybe 20 volunteers, half of whom had never been in a real fight. The odds had just gone from bad to impossible, and Caleb felt the old familiar weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders like iron chains. But then Clara's hand found his, squeezing once, and he felt the weight shift from burden to purpose. These people were counting on him, trusting him, and by God, he wasn't going to let them down. "Everyone to positions," he called out, his voice carrying through the pre-dawn darkness. "Hold your fire until I give the word. Make every shot count. And remember, you're not just fighting for yourselves. You're fighting for every person in this town who can't fight. Make them proud." A ragged cheer went up from the volunteers, and Caleb saw their fear transform into determination. They were ready, as ready as they'd ever be. Beside him, Clara checked her rifle one final time, her face set with calm resolution. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "I want you to know I love you. I've loved you since you tackled me behind that log and shielded me with your body. I've loved you through every conversation, every shared danger, every moment we've stolen between violence. And I'll love you beyond today, whether we survive or not." "We'll survive," Caleb said, and willed it to be true. "We have to. We've got too much living left to do." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when they heard it. The thunder of hoofbeats, the war cries of men who thought they were riding to easy victory. Caleb watched them come, dark shapes against the dawn, and tightened his grip on his rifle. This was it. The moment that would determine whether Copper Ridge stood or fell, whether his second chance at happiness would survive past sunrise. "Here they come," he said quietly, and Clara nodded beside him, steady and brave and everything he'd ever needed. The battle for Copper Ridge was about to begin. The riders came fast and confident, 30 strong, their horses kicking up dust that caught the first rays of dawn like smoke. At their head rode Marcus Hadley, his left arm bound in a crude sling, but his right hand holding a rifle with the ease of someone who'd been born to violence. Caleb could see the madness in the young man's eyes, even from a distance. the kind of desperate fury that made men dangerous because they'd stopped caring whether they lived or died. "Hold," Caleb said quietly to the volunteers positioned along the main street. "Let them get close. Make every shot count." Beside him, Clara's breathing was steady, her rifle trained on the approaching riders. He could feel the tension in her body, see the set of her jaw, and recognized in her the same transformation he'd seen in himself years ago. The moment when survival stopped being theoretical and became the only thing that mattered. Hadley's men spread out as they entered the town, some heading toward the bank, others toward the buildings Caleb had fortified. They were expecting resistance, clearly, but not the level of organization they were riding into. Winters had told them the town would be sleeping, vulnerable, easy prey. Instead, they were riding into a trap that would cost them everything. "Now!" Caleb's voice cracked through the dawn like thunder, and suddenly Copper Ridge erupted in gunfire. The carefully positioned volunteers opened up from windows, doorways, rooftops, a devastating crossfire that caught Hadley's men completely exposed in the middle of the street. Horses screamed and men fell, and the confident charge dissolved into chaos as the surviving riders scattered, looking for cover that Caleb had deliberately made scarce. Caleb worked his rifle with methodical precision, firing, levering, firing again. Beside him, Clara's rifle barked in steady rhythm, and he saw one of Hadley's men clutch his shoulder and fall from his saddle. She didn't celebrate, didn't even pause, just levered another round and found her next target. 3 days ago, she'd been a banker's daughter arriving on a stagecoach. Now she was a woman fighting for her home, and the transformation filled Caleb with equal parts pride and terror. The initial volley had dropped at least 8 men and scattered the rest, but Hadley's gang wasn't beaten. They regrouped behind cover, wagons, water troughs, the corners of buildings, and began returning fire with discipline that spoke of military training. Bullets tore through wood and shattered windows, and Caleb heard someone cry out as they were hit. "Medical station," he shouted. "Get the wounded to Mrs. Patterson." "Caleb," Samuel's voice carried from across the street. "They're trying to flank us, coming up through the alley behind the mercantile." Caleb turned to Clara. "Stay here, keep firing, keep their heads down. Don't let them advance." "Where are you going?" "To stop that flanking maneuver before it splits our defense." He was already moving, staying low, using every scrap of cover. Behind him, he heard Clara's rifle continue its steady rhythm, and he sent up a prayer to whatever God might be listening that she'd still be alive when this was over. The alley was narrow and dark, perfect for an ambush. Caleb approached from the side, using a broken fence for cover, and counted 4 men creeping toward the main street. If they reached it, they'd be able to fire into the backs of his volunteers, and the defense would collapse. He couldn't let that happen. Caleb stepped into the alley, his Colt drawn, and fired 4 times in rapid succession. The first man went down instantly. The second took a bullet in the leg and fell screaming. The third and fourth spun toward him, bringing their rifles up, and for one eternal second Caleb thought he'd miscalculated, that he'd traded his life for a tactical advantage. Then Briggs appeared at the other end of the alley with his shotgun, and the fight was over before it truly began. The 2 remaining men threw down their weapons, hands raised, faces pale with the realization that they were done. "Get them to the sheriff," Caleb told Briggs. "Then get back to your position. This isn't over." Back on the main street, the gunfight had settled into an ugly stalemate. Hadley's remaining men, maybe 15 still capable of fighting, had taken up defensive positions and were trading fire with the volunteers. Bodies lay in the street, some moving, some horribly still, and Caleb felt the familiar weight of combat settling over him like a shroud. This was what war looked like, stripped of glory and romance. Just scared people killing each other over grievances that probably didn't matter half as much as they thought. He found Clara where he'd left her, reloading with hands that were steady despite the chaos. A graze along her cheek bled sluggishly, and Caleb's heart clenched at the sight. "You're hit." "Barely. I've cut myself worse shaving." She stopped, registering his expression. "I'm fine, Caleb. It's not even deep, but we've got bigger problems. Hadley's men brought torches. They're trying to set fires, burn us out." Caleb looked and saw she was right. Several buildings on the eastern edge of town were already smoking, flames beginning to lick at wooden walls dried by summer heat. If the fires spread, if they couldn't contain them, the town would burn regardless of who won the gunfight. "Samuel," Caleb called out. Get a bucket brigade going. We need to contain those fires before they spread. But even as he gave the order, he saw the trap. Putting out the fires would require men to leave cover, to expose themselves to Hadley's riflemen. And Hadley knew it. The fires were deliberate, designed to force impossible choices. Let the town burn or risk everything to save it. You bastard, Caleb muttered, understanding the cruel genius of the tactic. Hadley wasn't trying to win through superior firepower anymore. He was trying to burn them out, force them into the open, make the defenders choose between their lives and their homes. Caleb, Thomas Beaumont's voice carried from the bank. We can't let it spread. If those fires reach the mercantile, the ammunition inside... He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Everyone understood what a building full of ammunition would do if it caught fire. The explosion would level half the town and probably kill anyone nearby. Caleb's mind raced through options, each worse than the last. Then Clara's hand on his arm pulled him back to focus. What if we give him what he wants? She said quietly. What? Hadley. He's not here for the town, not really. He's here for my father, for revenge against the Beaumonts. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were troubled. What if I go out there, offer to surrender, draw him into the open? Absolutely not. Caleb's response was immediate and absolute. That's not even a discussion, Clara. I won't use you as bait. I'm not asking permission. She checked her rifle, started to stand, and Caleb grabbed her arm. Clara, no, please, there has to be another way. There isn't, and you know it. She turned to face him fully, and he saw in her eyes the same stubborn courage that had made him fall in love with her. Every minute we fight here, more people die. More of the town burns, and for what? Because 30 years ago my father made business decisions that hurt people? Because Marcus Hadley can't let go of his grief long enough to see he's become the very thing he hates? That's not your fault. You don't owe him anything? Maybe not, but I owe this town. These people are fighting because of my family, dying to protect Beaumont interests. The least I can do is give them a chance to stop dying. She pulled free of his grip, stood, and before he could stop her, she was walking toward the street, her hands raised, her rifle left behind. Clara! Caleb lunged after her, but Beaumont caught him, the older man's grip surprisingly strong. Let her do this, Beaumont said, his voice rough with emotion. My daughter knows what she's doing. Have faith in her. She's going to get killed. Maybe. Or maybe she's going to save all of us. Beaumont's eyes were fixed on Clara as she walked into the open, straight and proud and terrifyingly vulnerable. That's who she is, Whitlock. That's who she's always been. Someone who steps forward when others step back. Clara's voice rang out clear and strong across the battlefield. Marcus Hadley, I'm Clara Beaumont. I'm the one you wanted. I'm coming out. Tell your men to hold their fire. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Hadley stepped out from behind an overturned wagon, his rifle trained on Clara, his face a mask of rage, and something else, something that might have been shame or regret buried under years of anger. You think I want you? Hadley called back. You think any of this was about you? I think it was always about me, about my father, about making us feel what you felt when you lost your home. Clara kept walking, kept her hands raised, kept her voice calm. And I'm here to tell you I understand. I understand your anger, your grief, your need to make someone pay. But Marcus, and I'm going to call you Marcus because we're both young and we're both products of decisions we didn't make. This won't bring your parents back. Burning this town won't restore what was taken from you. It'll just create more orphans, more widows, more people carrying the same grief that's eating you alive. You don't know anything about my grief. But Hadley's voice cracked, and Caleb saw the rifle waver. You're right, I don't. But I know about loss. I lost someone I loved, someone I was going to marry, build a life with. He died, and I thought the grief would kill me too. For a while, I wanted it to. Clara was close now, maybe 20 feet from Hadley, close enough that Caleb could barely breathe. But you know what I learned, Marcus? Grief is just love with nowhere to go. And you can either let it poison everything it touches, or you can transform it into something that honors the people you lost. Your mother, your father, would they want this? Would they want you to die in a pointless battle, or would they want you to live, to build something new, to be better than the circumstances that broke them? Hadley's rifle was shaking now, and Caleb could see the young man's face crumpling, years of rage collapsing under the weight of Clara's words. He took everything from us. I know, and I can't give it back. But Marcus, I can try to make it right going forward. I can review your family's case, see if there's any way to restore even part of what was lost. I can work to change how my father does business, to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to others. But only if you give me the chance. Only if you choose to stop this before more people die. Behind Hadley, his remaining men were watching, uncertain, and Caleb realized the entire battle had come down to this moment. A young man carrying too much grief facing a young woman offering grace. If Hadley refused, if his rage won out over reason, they'd all die here. If he accepted, if somehow Clara's words reached through the armor of his pain, there might be a chance for something better. The silence stretched impossibly long. Then, slowly, Marcus Hadley lowered his rifle. "I'm tired," he said, and his voice was that of a boy rather than a man. "I'm so goddamn tired of being angry." Clara closed the distance between them, and to Caleb's utter shock, she put her hand on Hadley's shoulder. "Then let it go, Marcus. Let it go and choose something different. Choose life instead of death. Choose hope instead of vengeance. It won't be easy, and the grief won't disappear, but it gets bearable. I promise you it gets bearable." Hadley's face crumpled entirely, and he dropped to his knees, his rifle falling to the dust beside him. Behind him, his men were laying down their weapons, hands raised, the fight draining out of them as surely as blood from a wound. The battle was over, not with a final gunshot, but with a young woman's courage and a broken man's surrender. Caleb was moving before he knew it, running to Clara, pulling her away from Hadley and into his arms, holding her so tightly she gasped. "Don't you ever do that again," he said into her hair. "Don't you ever risk yourself like that again." "I can't promise that." But she was holding him just as tightly, her body shaking with reaction now that the danger had passed. "But I can promise I'll always come back to you, always, Caleb." Around them, Copper Ridge was coming alive with the sounds of relief, cheering volunteers, people emerging from shelter, the urgent work of putting out fires and tending to the wounded. The cost had been high, 4 volunteers dead, maybe a dozen wounded, and 6 of Hadley's men would never ride again. But the town had survived, and with survival came the chance to rebuild, to do better, to learn from the violence and choose a different path forward. The federal marshals arrived 2 hours later, drawn by the smoke and gunfire, and they took Hadley and his surviving men into custody. But before they led him away, Hadley looked at Clara one more time. "Did you mean it? About reviewing my family's case?" "I meant every word." Clara's voice was firm. "I can't promise I can fix everything, Marcus, but I promise I'll try. And I promise that whether you're in prison or free, someone will be working to make sure what happened to your family doesn't happen to others." Hadley nodded, something like peace settling over his features. "Thank you, Miss Beaumont, and I'm sorry for all of it." "So am I," Clara said quietly. "So am I." The next few days passed in a blur of recovery and rebuilding. The fires had damaged several buildings, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. The wounded were tended to, the dead were mourned and buried, and slowly Copper Ridge began to knit itself back together. Caleb worked alongside the volunteers, helping repair what had been damaged, and found himself welcomed not as an outsider or a hired gun, but as one of them, someone who'd stood when it mattered, who'd bled for the same dirt they called home. On the 4th day after the battle, Thomas Beaumont summoned him to the bank. Caleb went expecting a payment, a thank you, maybe an offer of more temporary work. What he got instead was something entirely different. "I've been reviewing my business practices," Beaumont said without preamble, "looking at them through my daughter's eyes, trying to see what she sees. And I don't much like what I've found. I've been so focused on profit, on building something that would last, that I forgot who I was building it for. I forgot that people matter more than properties." He pulled out a folder, spread papers across his desk. "These are loan modifications, revised terms for everyone I've foreclosed on in the past 3 years, including the Hadley Ranch. I'm offering them a chance to buy back their properties at fair market value, with payment terms they can actually meet. It won't undo the damage, but it's a start." "That's good," Caleb said, uncertain where this was going. "It is. But it's not enough." Beaumont looked at him directly. "I need someone to oversee these modifications, to work with the families, to make sure the new terms are fair and enforced. Someone who understands both sides, the business realities and the human costs. Someone these people will trust because he's proven he cares more about doing right than getting rich. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a future, a permanent position, good salary, respect, purpose. All the things my daughter tells me you've been looking for. Beaumont's expression softened slightly. And I'm offering my blessing, if you want it, for you and Clara. She loves you, Whitlock. And unless I'm badly mistaken, you love her too. Caleb felt his throat tighten with emotion. I do, more than I thought I could love anything again. Then stay. Build a life here. Help me turn this bank into something that serves people instead of just extracting from them. And when you're ready, when you feel like you've earned it, ask my daughter to marry you. I suspect she'll say yes. I suspect she will too. Caleb found himself smiling. But I should probably ask her myself first, shouldn't I? Probably wise. Beaumont extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Whitlock? Caleb shook his hand, feeling pieces of his life clicking into place like a lock finally finding its key. We do, Mr. Beaumont. We absolutely do. He found Clara at the schoolhouse construction site, arguing with the foreman about window placement again. Some things, Caleb reflected with deep affection, never changed. She saw him approaching, and her face lit up with a smile that made his heart stutter. I heard you were meeting with my father. How did it go? He offered me a job. Permanent position, working with loan modifications and foreclosure reviews. And you took it? Her voice was carefully neutral, but he could see the hope in her eyes. I took it, along with his blessing to court his daughter properly, assuming she's interested. She's very interested. Clara closed the distance between them, taking his hands in hers. But Caleb, you need to be sure. This is a big change from the life you've been living. Staying in one place, building something permanent, being part of a community instead of just passing through. Are you ready for that? He thought about his answer, wanting to get it right. 3 weeks ago, I would have said no. I would have taken my payment and left before dawn, convinced that staying anywhere too long was just asking for pain. But then I met a woman who refused to be saved, who fought beside me instead of hiding behind me, who looked at my damage and saw possibility instead of just broken pieces. He cupped her face in his hands, marveling at how natural it felt. You showed me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story, Clara. That loss is just one chapter, not the whole book. So yes, I'm ready. I'm ready to stay, to build, to risk my heart again because the alternative is just existing, and you've reminded me that I deserve better than that. Clara's eyes were bright with tears. We both deserve better than that. We deserve happiness and partnership and all the messy, complicated, wonderful things that come with choosing to love someone. Is that what we're doing? Choosing to love each other? I think we already chose weeks ago in a canyon when you shielded me from bullets. Everything since then has just been confirming what we both already knew. She smiled through her tears. But yes, Caleb Whitlock, I'm choosing to love you every day for as long as you'll let me. How about forever? He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. How about we choose forever and see what happens? Forever sounds perfect. He kissed her then, there in the half-built schoolhouse that represented Copper Ridge's future, and felt his own future clicking into place around him. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. There would be hard days and complicated decisions and moments when the grief of what he'd lost tried to pull him back into darkness. But with Clara beside him, with purpose and community, and the simple joy of being needed, Caleb thought maybe, just maybe, he could build something that lasted. The months that followed proved him right. Caleb threw himself into his new work, traveling to meet with the families Beaumont had foreclosed on, listening to their stories, helping them find paths forward that honored both their dignity and the bank's need for responsible lending. It was harder than he'd expected, requiring patience and diplomacy and skills he'd never thought he'd need. But it was also deeply satisfying in ways that writing and shooting and surviving had never been. He was building instead of just protecting, creating futures instead of just preventing deaths. The Hadley Ranch was the hardest case. Marcus was in prison awaiting trial, and his wife Margaret had moved to Denver to start over. But they were cousins, extended family, people who'd worked that land for generations and had nowhere else to go. Caleb spent weeks negotiating new terms, finding investors, restructuring the debt until there was a path, narrow and difficult but real, for the Hadley Ranch to become productive again under new management. It wouldn't erase what had happened, but it honored the land and the people who'd loved it. When Marcus Hadley's trial came, Caleb and Clara both testified, not to excuse his actions, but to explain the circumstances that had led to them. The judge sentenced him to 5 years, with the possibility of parole after 3 if he demonstrated genuine rehabilitation. It was more mercy than most expected and less than some thought he deserved, but it felt right. Justice, Caleb was learning, wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about finding a way forward that acknowledged harm while still allowing for redemption. Through it all, Clara was beside him, sometimes literally, when cases required her father's authority, but more often as a partner in the larger work of transforming how Beaumont Bank did business. She pushed for more flexible terms, for considering circumstances rather than just numbers, for treating borrowers as people rather than assets. Thomas Beaumont resisted at first, his old habits and fears pushing back against change. But, gradually, as he saw the results, families rebuilding, the community growing stronger, the bank's reputation improving, he began to understand what his daughter had been trying to tell him all along. Profit and compassion weren't opposites. Done right, they reinforced each other. By the time autumn arrived, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Caleb had become as much a part of Copper Ridge as the bank or the church or the mountains themselves. He knew everyone's names, their stories, their struggles. He attended the town meetings, helped with the harvest festival, even stood as godfather when Samuel's wife had a baby girl they named Hope. It was the kind of life he'd never thought he'd have again. Ordinary and extraordinary in equal measure, filled with the small joys and small sorrows that made up actual living rather than just surviving. On a clear October evening, with the first snow already dusting the high peaks, Caleb took Clara on a ride to a place he'd been preparing for weeks. It was a piece of land about a mile outside town, on a gentle hillside with views of the valley and the mountains beyond. He'd bought it with his savings and started building. Just a small cabin, nothing fancy, but solid and well-made and positioned to catch both sunrise and sunset. "What is this?" Clara asked as they dismounted, looking at the cabin with wonder. "It's a home. Or it will be when it's finished. I've been working on it in my spare time, trying to get it ready before winter." He took her hand, led her to the porch he'd built with his own hands. "I wanted to have something to offer you, Clara. Something more than just promises and possibility. A real place, a real future. Somewhere we could build a life together." "Caleb," her voice was thick with emotion. "Let me finish." He knelt, pulling out a ring he'd had made by the town jeweler, simple gold with a small emerald that matched her eyes. "I know I'm not what your father probably envisioned for you. I'm older, damaged in ways that will probably never fully heal, haunted by ghosts that won't ever completely disappear. But Clara, you've made me believe that damage doesn't mean broken, that haunted doesn't mean hopeless. You've given me back my life, and I want to spend the rest of it loving you, supporting you, being the partner you deserve." He held up the ring, his hand steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Clara Beaumont, will you marry me?" She was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face, but she was also smiling wider than he'd ever seen. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." She pulled him up, kissing him fiercely, laughing through her tears. "You fool, you beautiful fool. Of course I'll marry you. Did you really think there was any other answer?" "I hoped, but hoping and knowing are different things." "Then know this. I love you, Caleb Whitlock. I love your strength and your vulnerability, your courage and your caution, your past and your future. I love all of you, and I want to spend my life showing you exactly how much." She held out her hand, and he slipped the ring onto her finger, where it caught the evening light and seemed to glow. "When?" "Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next month, next spring. I just want it to be soon, because every day we're not married feels like a day wasted." "Spring," Clara decided. "Let's do spring, when everything's new and growing. We'll get married under the apple trees in my father's garden, with the whole town watching. And then we'll come here, to this beautiful home you've built, and we'll start our forever." They sat on the porch as the sun set, planning their future in the way of people who'd learned not to take tomorrow for granted. They talked about this cabin, about what furniture they'd need and how they'd arrange it. They talked about work, about the families they were helping, and the changes still needed. They talked about children, maybe 2 or 3, maybe more, filling the cabin with noise and life and the messy joy of family. They talked about growing old together, about sitting on this same porch 40 years from now, watching their grandchildren play in the valley below. It was the kind of conversation that would have been impossible for Caleb 6 months ago, before a stagecoach arrived in Willow Creek carrying a banker's daughter who refused to be just cargo. Before ambushes and battles, and a woman who'd seen his damage and called it potential. Before Clara had taken his hand and led him back to the land of the living. Winter came early that year, blanketing Copper Ridge in snow that transformed the rough frontier town into something almost magical. Caleb spent the cold months finishing the cabin, often with Clara beside him, both of them working to turn a structure into a home. They filled it with furniture made by the town carpenter, with quilts sewn by Mrs. Patterson, with books from Clara's collection and guns from Caleb's. It was a strange mixture of refinement and frontier practicality, and it was perfect. The wedding took place in April, under apple trees in full bloom that scattered petals like snow across the garden. The whole town attended, along with the marshals who'd helped save them, Jacob Winters and his wife Margaret, both working to rebuild their lives after the trial. And even Marcus Hadley, brought from prison for the day under guard, given permission by the judge to witness the marriage of the woman who'd saved his life by refusing to see him as just his worst moment. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony, his voice steady as he spoke about love and redemption, about how the greatest act of courage was choosing to risk your heart again after it had been broken. Clara wore a simple white dress that made her look like spring itself, and Caleb wore the best suit he'd ever owned, feeling uncomfortable and nervous and happier than he'd ever thought possible. When the Reverend asked if anyone objected, there was only joyful silence, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in 3 counties. The reception lasted until midnight, with dancing and music and enough food to feed twice the people who attended. Caleb danced with his wife. His wife! Under lanterns strung through the apple trees, holding her close and marveling at the simple fact that this was his life now. Not borrowed time, not temporary refuge, but actual living with a future that stretched out before them bright with possibility. Later, much later, they rode to their cabin under a moon so bright it cast shadows, and Ash, patient, loyal Ash, knew the way without guidance. They spent their first night as husband and wife in the home they'd built together, and when Caleb woke the next morning to find Clara sleeping beside him, sunlight streaming through windows he'd framed himself, he felt something he hadn't felt in 8 years. Peace. Not the absence of pain or grief or memory, those would always be part of him, written into his bones and his history. But peace in knowing that pain wasn't the whole story, that grief could coexist with joy, that memory could honor the past while still embracing the future. The years that followed were good ones, marked not by dramatic events, but by the steady accumulation of ordinary moments that made up an extraordinary life. Caleb continued his work with the bank, helping families find stable footing, learning that redemption was rarely dramatic but often profound. Clara opened a small clinic in town, using her medical training to serve people who couldn't afford the doctor from Denver, bringing the same fierce compassion to healing that she'd brought to everything else. Their first child arrived 2 years after the wedding, a boy they named Thomas Daniel, honoring both their fathers and the men they'd lost. He was followed by a daughter 3 years later, Sarah Elizabeth, carrying forward the memory of loves that had ended but never faded. And then another boy and another girl, until their cabin was bursting with life and noise and the beautiful chaos of family. Thomas Beaumont lived long enough to see 3 of his grandchildren born, to watch his daughter and son-in-law transform his bank from an institution that extracted wealth into one that built community. He died peacefully in his sleep at 78, and at his funeral half the town came to pay respects, not just to the banker who'd employed them, but to the man who'd learned, late but genuinely, that people mattered more than profit. Marcus Hadley was released after 4 years, having earned early parole through good behavior and genuine rehabilitation. He didn't return to Copper Ridge. The memories were too painful, the associations too complicated. But he wrote to Clara occasionally, letters that spoke of a man trying to build something new from the ashes of what he'd lost. He married eventually, had children, became a carpenter in Montana. He named his first daughter Clara, and when she asked why, he told her it was after someone who'd shown him that mercy wasn't weakness, and that choosing life over death was the bravest thing a person could do. The schoolhouse Clara had fought so hard to perfect became one of the finest in the territory, its high windows and good ventilation exactly as she'd envisioned. She served on its board for 20 years, ensuring that every child in Copper Ridge, regardless of their parents' ability to pay, received an education. The building still stands today, a testament to the power of one stubborn woman refusing to accept that fine was good enough. And Caleb Whitlock, the man who'd once believed he was too broken to deserve happiness, lived to see his children grow and marry and have children of their own. He lived to see Copper Ridge transform from a rough frontier town into a proper city, with streets and schools and a future bright with possibility. He lived to sit on his porch with his wife of 37 years, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold, and know with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice all those years ago when a banker's daughter had asked him to try. On his 71st birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren and what felt like half of Copper Ridge, someone asked Caleb what the secret to a good life was. He thought about it for a moment, his eyes finding Clara's across the crowded room, and smiled. "There's no secret," he said. "Just show up when it matters. Stand for the people who can't stand for themselves. And when someone offers you a second chance at happiness, be brave enough to take it. The rest is just details." Clara caught his eye then, and he saw in her face the same love that had sustained them through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, all the beautiful complexity of a life fully lived. She smiled, and he smiled back, and in that moment he understood that love wasn't about dramatic gestures or perfect moments. It was about choosing, every single day, to stand beside someone through whatever came. It was about building something together that was stronger than what either could build alone. It was about refusing to let fear or loss or grief dictate your future, choosing instead to risk your heart on the radical possibility that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. Caleb Whitlock had sworn he'd never love again, but then a woman with green eyes and stubborn courage had ambushed his carefully guarded heart, and he'd surrendered without a fight. Looking back from the vantage point of a life well lived, he couldn't imagine a better defeat. Some battles, he'd learned, you won by losing, and some surrenders were just the beginning of victory. The cowboy who'd sworn he'd never love again had fallen anyway, spectacularly and permanently, and spent the rest of his days grateful for the ambush that brought him home.